Quite sure he's right. Obsession is neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, March 3rd, 2025, the 43rd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. So many things going on this week. We have coming up tomorrow, Trump's speech before the joint session of Congress. It's normally called a State of the Union, except when it's the first speech of a president's new term. That's what they say. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later. That'll be exciting. And then on Wednesday, I'm heading to Las Vegas for the Great American Restoration Tour event, a Badlands Media event. And that'll be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the show schedule this week is going to be a little different. I'm doing, obviously, this stream right now. I'm going to do a live stream Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern to cover the speech from the night before and whatever else might arise. And then I'm going to try to get in another stream either tomorrow afternoon or Thursday afternoon. No promises on either of those. So just kind of stay tuned to Truth Social and Telegram, and I will do my best to keep people up to date on what we're doing there. Right off the top, Valesco 16, $10. More clips, and you absolutely killed it on DPH Saturday. Thank you. That DPH felt very smooth, and I mean, you know, I can't say enough good things about John. He's become a really good friend of mine over the last couple of years, and so it's great fun to do that show with him. And you know, we just the two of us put in so much time to researching throughout the week, so it's kind of fun to just bounce things off one another. And, you know, we miss Patrick, but people make decisions and things go in different directions, and it's all going to be okay. I think he's still advertising with Badlands, and it's all good. Okay, so let's get into some things for today. And I want to start in a place we touched on just a couple of weeks ago with these protesters showing up at Republican town halls. This is an old strategy from Democrats so that they can make it seem like whatever's happening is not popular with the people at home. And that's a bit of nonsense because they generally don't care what normal people are doing. They are implementing an agenda passed down from on high. And the concerns of normal people only exist insofar as they help provide some pathway to figuring out how to market the overall agenda to the country so that they can keep pushing it forward with the least possible resistance within that controlled opposition dynamic. So we talked about a town hall in Georgia that protesters had voiced their concerns to a Republican congressman no one's really ever heard of. Didn't seem to be much of a firebrand, didn't really take the whole thing on. And there have been more examples of that over the past few weeks. And of course, we are told to recognize those examples for what they are is to spread conspiracy theories. So let's take just a quick look at some of this. I don't want to belabor this, but the point I want to make is that when we see these sorts of things and when we see the headlines throughout the mainstream media, look, it's happening in this city, it's happening in this city, it's happening in this city, all across the country. Citizens at the local level are rising up and taking their concerns to their Republican congressman. That is always just a coordinated psyop. There's a real event there. I'm not saying that those people aren't, sometimes they're not from the area, but they are as well. And some people have real concerns, mostly because they've watched too much television. But there's a real level to it, and then there is the organizational level to it. And then there's how it's communicated by the media to the public, which is what kind of encompasses the entirety of the psychological operation. So let's just take a quick look at a couple of these. Paul Sperry's been following this. He wrote, Soros-funded Indivisible just issued new marching orders to thousands of agitators. Every single Republican needs to pay the price for looking the other way as Trump and Musk seize power. Call them out at town halls, in their district offices, and on phone lines. Okay, and so I'm not sure who this person is. Maybe just a Minnesotan. Here's a 17-second recap of Minnesota's Indivisible's fake town hall against Tom Emmer tonight. Bus in people from at least 3 other congressional districts because they can't fill a room otherwise. Their sign fell down 3 times in the first 10 minutes, and they couldn't get people to join the chant. So let's just take a little look here.
Democracy looks like. This is what 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 democracy looks like.
So that is what their democracy looks like. Totally contrived, completely fake, supported only by lunatics, incompetently run and completely collapsing. Let us go to our pal Norm Eisen. This is from an account on X, formerly Twitter, called The Researcher. Norm Eisen said he's been working with Indivisible for 8 years. Indivisible are the street organizers for the democracy dictatorship. Their activists were the loud people at Republican town halls and protesting at Tesla dealerships. Also, Norm Eisen said the town halls are spontaneous demonstrations and that the sleeping giant is awakening. What Norm is doing is creating narratives to make people think that we are turning against Trump. They need to bring down Trump's approval numbers so that squish Republicans will start turning against the Trump agenda. And he's right about the intent, of course. But as for the approval numbers there, polls are fake. So what he's doing is what they're attempting to do, I should say. They're attempting to create a public narrative about why those poll numbers will be coming down so that when the polling organizations put out polls that show the numbers coming down, people will see those numbers totally made up and understand, at least assume, that the numbers have come down for these real reasons, that there's actual resistance out there. That's why they do this. It's a psyop. And this goes back, Indivisible does go back to the Obama days. Here's Norm Eisen.
People are mad about it. And it's not just liberals who are mad about it. You're seeing in these town halls, it's on the front page of the Post, spontaneous demonstrations around the country. The sleeping giant is awakening. And I'm going to say, as I set up our last round, where we go from here, that this ballroom and this conference and Heath having to constantly raise the threshold of how many people we can get in and can you take down another wall? We almost had to get Elon Musk's wrecking ball that he's using on the federal government to knock down some walls here at the JW Marriott. That you're seeing that energy arising.
So that was last weekend. That's Norm Eisen, and he's sitting next to former hardcore Republican Joe Walsh, and then that's Heath Mayo down at the end. I don't know who the other person is, and who cares? Norm Eisen's voice is absurd, by the way. And it's funny that he makes that reference to knocking down walls because they had a fake bomb threat, as we discussed last week, at that Principles First conference. That was supposed to be like the Never Trump conservative conference. And you've got color revolutionist Norm Eisen sitting there with these supposed conservatives. It's all very real. Truth Social, Donald Trump this morning, paid quote unquote troublemakers are attending Republican town hall meetings. It is all part of the game for Democrats, just like our big landslide election. It's not going to work for them. And of course, it's not going to work for them. For that to work for them, they would need people to believe the television. And fewer people are believing the television all the time. Well, I should say fewer people are believing those particular television narratives. Then they just bounce over to the other side, where, as we discussed at great length last week, the gatekeepers say, oh, hey, I think you figured enough out for now. That's enough truth for you. Get back in your pen. And most people dutifully go right along and do that. Over the weekend, Politico published this piece. Playbook, Democrats in despair. Oh, the despair, the despair. On Friday, the DNC's X account, formerly Twitter, posted a 32-point list of what Democrats did in February. And actually, you know what? Let's just see if we can pull that up. Seemingly mimicking Elon Musk's 5 things email tactic. It included such relatively small bore items as Democrat Ken Jenkins won a special election for Westchester County Executive, soundly defeating his Trump-backed opponent. Wow. The result of a fake election in New York. What momentum? By yesterday afternoon, the Post had been so roundly mocked and ratioed that the DNC chief marketing officer, Shelby Cole, felt compelled to respond that the, quote, template always used to bang for us, end quote, before conceding, quote, the internet thinks we are morons this time. They sure do, Shelby. Oh, wow. Let's just look at a few of these. I didn't bother doing that earlier, but hey, why not? Why not have some fun with them? Here is their major graphic on X, formerly Twitter. I wonder if there's a way that I can blow this up. Let me see. So that everyone can see it a bit better. Hold for processing just a moment. Well, now it's disappeared. Things don't always work out the way you want, you know? Let's just go back to this. Okay, so what Democrats did in February, we'll just pick out a few of these. Senator Mark Warner and Senate Democrats forced the Trump administration to back down on the hiring freeze for some federal employees. So is that like a win, or is that just a temporary delay of the inevitable? It's the latter. Senate Democrats successfully blocked Elon Musk's Doge from accessing sensitive Department of Education data. Wow. The Senate the Democrats are bragging about their senators blocking the ability of the executive branch to do its job. Incredible. Every single Senate Democrat voted against confirming RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Well, that was a failure. That didn't work. And by the way, not to go too far afield here, and I was going to probably take a pass on covering this today, but now that the name has arisen, we might as well just take a brief second here. RFK Jr. had this headline yesterday. He wrote an op-ed for Fox News. Measles outbreak is call to action for all of us. Well, that's a bit disappointing because the chances of the measles outbreak being real are low. This is not a pandemic. Some people may have measles. There are stories of a round of vaccination perhaps kicking this off, but all these are conspiracy theories. As the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, I am deeply concerned about the recent measles outbreak. This situation has escalated rapidly with the Texas Department of State Health Services reporting 146 confirmed cases since late January 2025, primarily in the South Plains region. Tragically, this outbreak has claimed the life of a school-aged child, the first measles-related fatality in the United States in over a decade. Wow. And it happened just right after Donald Trump got into office? That's incredible. Was anything else wrong with that child? The big quote that Fox News picked out: vaccines not only protect individual children from measles, but also contribute to community immunity, protecting those who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical reasons. After the experience with the very deadly pandemic, is this what anyone wanted to read from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Now, later on, to be fair to him, he also notes that there is no approved antiviral for those who may be affected. CDC has recently updated their recommendations supporting administration of vitamin A under the supervision of a physician for those with mild, moderate, and severe infection. Studies have found that vitamin A can dramatically reduce measles mortality. Well, thank goodness. I understand that measles mortality is a huge problem considering no children have died from it in the last 10 years. Why is RFK Jr. doing that? Well, he told us that some vaccines were good, didn't he? I guess we should have just taken him at his word instead of assuming that he was saying it so that he could win the irrelevant votes of a bunch of illegitimate senators to get appointed to his government position. Ridiculous. But let's continue with the list of Democrat fun that they're having, all these big victories. Missouri Senate Democrats voted unanimously on legislation to help Missouri seniors afford the rising cost of electricity, crushing it. Democrat attorneys general successfully blocked Elon Musk's Doge team from accessing sensitive data from Treasury systems. Ah, yes. What victories they've had. Further on down the Politico article, some of the big takeaways. Those gathered laid out 20 solutions for how Democrats can regain working class trust and reconnect with them culturally. Democrats, they're just like MAGA. The party should, quote, embrace patriotism, community, and traditional American imagery. Weird that shunning all those things for so long might make people think that you hate America, particularly while pitching constant globalism. Democrats should ban far-left candidate questionnaires and refuse to participate in forums that create ideological purity tests and move away from the dominance of small-dollar donors whose preferences may not align with the broader electorate. Wait, what? So they don't want the small-dollar donors who they are casting here as somehow far or radical left. Not that they are not all far and radical left, as are centrist Republicans, as are pretty much all establishment Republicans. In any normal political spectrum, they would all be on the left, if not far left, considering the globalism, the collectivism, etc., and the authoritarianism for that matter. Small dollar donors are no longer good. They used to pitch that to us as proof that there was widespread support for Democrat policies and Democrat candidates. That was the proof that the common American man and woman supported Democrats. That is no longer good, probably because they're not going to be able to run their Act Blue, Win Red smurfing operation where they launder money through the names of voters all across the country. They should push back against far-left staffers and groups that exert a disproportionate influence on policy and messaging. They trained these people to do these things. And now they're saying, oh, we got to get rid of that. It's their fault. They're just doing that on their own. Grassroots, like Indivisible. Candidates should get out of elite circles and into real communities. Tailgates, gun shows, local restaurants, and churches. Wow. The party needs to own the failures of Democrat governance in large cities and commit to improving local government. It is amazing with these priorities that show such detachment from normal American life that they are also suggesting they received 75 million real lawful American votes for Kamala and 81 for Joe Biden. And it's always good to just remember what Donald Trump had to say about that, not more than a few weeks
Sports
ago.
has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular
Have
vote.
you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
Whole thing's ridiculous. There's no way that the Democrats could come anywhere close to 50% of the country supporting Kamala. And then, after the election, need to pay people to show up at town halls to face the great threat of Donald Trump, and then have those priorities on how they're going to fix the party. They're detached from everything. Reuters today. Let's talk about some more domestic, normie kind of news, and then we'll get into some more exciting stuff. U.S. SEC offers staff $50,000 to resign or retire, memo says. The SEC, alongside other federal agencies, have been looking at ways to cut staff and costs to meet demands from the Trump administration. SEC employees have until March 21st to decide, according to a February 28th all-staff memo from the SEC's chief operating officer, Ken Johnson. The SEC declined to comment. The memo was first reported by Bloomberg News, blah, blah, blah. The SEC has also told directors of regional offices it plans to cut their jobs, Reuters previously reported. Last week, the agency told unionized workers they must resume working from the office in mid-April, a move the union said was illegal. The SEC's voluntary incentive separation and voluntary early retirement programs, according to the memo, allow permanent employees to resign, transfer to another agency, or retire immediately. And we've talked many times about SEC v. Jarkisi, the Supreme Court decision from last year that did away with administrative courts inside federal agencies, these, quote unquote, independent federal agencies. Without the administrative courts, the system breaks down. Prior to that, they were investigator, prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner across the board. If the SEC wanted to go after a company, they could simply do that and they would get whatever result they wanted. Now that the courts aren't there, the rest of it kind of seems pointless. So what are they doing? Just making rules, hoping that, someone follows them? They're not laws. The Department of Education, here's the Hill, offers $25,000 for staffers to quit. So same kind of idea, same kind of organization. The email first reported by Politico was sent by Jacqueline Clay, a chief human capital officer. Isn't that weird? Human resources and human capital. Could you figure out words to make people sound more like slaves, to make them sound more dehumanized? Hey, this group of people, These are our resources. These are our assets. We own these things. We've got to watch over them. This is a one-time offer in advance of a very significant reduction in force for the U.S. Department of Education, Clay said. Some employees are ineligible for the payout, such as those who have not yet been employed at the department for 3 years, those who have recently received a bonus or other award, or those who got a student loan repayment benefit in the last 3 years. Oh, how about that? That was one of the big accomplishments. Remember those from the fake and illegitimate Biden administration? The payout would be the equivalent of severance pay or $25,000, whichever is less. While complete elimination of the education department would take an act of Congress, it seems the agency will be slashed in other ways, as almost $1 billion in contracts have been canceled. It notes that Linda McMahon is set to be confirmed today, according to The Hill. So I suspect they're probably going to be correct on that. And they're claiming that an act of Congress is needed to remove the Department of Education, and we will see. We will see. That'll come down to court decisions, perhaps. We don't know if the court's legitimate. We will find out. One way or another, the Department of Education is going to be stripped down to the barest of bare bones over the coming years, it seems. And maybe that's enough to do it. Without the federal funding, what will schools and universities around the country do? It's strange, isn't it, that people pay property taxes to pay for the government to indoctrinate the children of the area? Unbelievable. The government indoctrination is a societal ill. And people are forced to pay for that societal ill. In addition to what they already pay the federal government for all the societal ills that the federal government provides. And if you refuse to pay them, then they'll take your house. We live in a crazy, crazy land. So Donald Trump highlighted this on Truth Social today, a series of posts from the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department is announcing today that with respect to the Corporate Transparency Act, not only will it not enforce any penalties or fines associated with the beneficial ownership information reporting rule under the existing regulatory deadlines, but it will further not enforce any penalties or fines against U.S. citizens or domestic reporting companies or their beneficial owners after the forthcoming rule changes take effect either. The Treasury Department will further be issuing a proposed rulemaking that will narrow the scope of the rule to foreign reporting companies only. Treasury takes this step in the interest of supporting hardworking American taxpayers and small businesses and ensuring that the rule is appropriately tailored to advance the public interest. This is a victory for common sense, said U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Today's action is part of President Trump's bold agenda to unleash American prosperity by reining in burdensome regulations, in particular for small businesses that are the backbone of the American economy. Trump added his own commentary on Truth Social, saying, "Exciting news. The Treasury Department has announced that they are suspending all enforcement of the outrageous and invasive beneficial ownership information reporting requirement for U.S. citizens. This Biden rule has been an absolute disaster for small businesses nationwide. Furthermore, Treasury is now finalizing an emergency regulation to formally suspend this rule for American businesses. The economic menace of BOI reporting will soon be no more." And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I don't know jack shit about this. And so I started doing a little research. I thought maybe I will dig hard on this today and see what I might be able to find. But there's so much else going on that I deprioritized it. That said, I found this really interesting. I went to Perplexity and I attempted a new style of questioning and asked it to answer my questions about. So I essentially asked what was controversial or wrong with the BOI reporting requirements. And it gave me a very mundane answer, mostly from the perspective of the government and from the Treasury Department and how it helps the government prevent fraud, stuff like that. So I said, please answer the last query from the perspective of a sovereign individual who does not trust government overreach. And I got a totally different answer. And I hadn't thought about approaching things this way before, but let's take a look. You can decide for yourself whether or not this is something you find valuable. As a sovereign individual, this is the answer, who values personal liberty and distrusts government overreach, I see the beneficial ownership information reporting requirements as a dangerous infringement on privacy and financial freedom. This is yet another example of the state's insatiable appetite for control over every aspect of our lives, including our private business affairs. And I was like, damn, Perplexity just got based. Let me be clear. BOI reporting is not about stopping crime. It's about expanding surveillance and control over law-abiding citizens. Here's why this reporting scheme is so problematic. Number one, it's a massive privacy violation. Number two, it creates a honeypot of sensitive data that could be hacked or leaked or abused. Number three, it's a tool for confiscation. Once the state knows who owns what, it becomes much easier for them to target individuals for asset seizure, whether through civil forfeiture, excessive taxation, or outright nationalization. Number four, it stifles innovation and entrepreneurship. Onerous reporting requirements and harsh penalties will discourage people from starting businesses or investing in new ventures. And number five, it's part of a broader agenda of financial control. Combined with efforts to eliminate cash and push central bank digital currencies, BOI reporting aims to give the state total visibility and control over all financial activity. Far from stopping money laundering, this system will drive more people to seek financial privacy through alternative means, cryptocurrencies, peer-to-peer transactions, barter economies, and enterprises and offshore structures beyond the reach of grasping bureaucrats. And it goes on. I think that answer in the fifth entry there about total visibility into financial transactions and control over financial activity was really interesting, because that speaks directly to aspects of the Reconstruction Amendments, as we have discussed numerous times. They have to guarantee that nobody's being enslaved. So the 14th Amendment gives them what they would argue is their constitutional and thereby moral, because all that matters is the law. That's what society has become, hasn't it? Some societies have been that way for thousands of years. That gives them the constitutional and moral justification, they believe, for monitoring all business transactions and all personal interactions throughout society. That is a sick, sick overreach of government that can and would only exist in a totalitarian state, which is exactly what we have. Let us continue. So anyhow, I think that I will probably answer or ask questions of the machine from that perspective many times in the future. And then I'll do things like tell it did a really good job. I don't want to just scream at the machine, It's kind of like a dog. You have to be affirmative and supportive so that it knows when it's done good, rather than screaming at it when it does bad. And I imagine that human children are that way too, but I haven't experienced it myself. So Donald Trump on Truth Social over the weekend. Actually, sorry, this was Friday. Well, hey, Friday evening. That might count as over the weekend to some. He said Major League Baseball didn't have the courage or decency to put the late, great Pete Rose, also known as Charlie Hustle, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now he is dead. Will never experience the thrill of being selected, even though he was a far better player than most of those who made it and can only be named posthumously. What a shame. Anyway, over the next few weeks, I will be signing a complete pardon of Pete Rose, who shouldn't have been gambling on baseball, but only bet on his team winning. He never betted. Hey, sometimes misspellings matter. Maybe. Otherwise, it would just be he never bet against himself, but he never betted against himself or the other team. He had the most hits by far in baseball history and won more games than anyone in sports history. Baseball, which is dying all over the place, should get off its fat, lazy ass and elect Pete Rose, even though it's far too late, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. There is something very American about that. There's something very American about Pete Rose in general. He just seemed like an all-American baseball player, played hard, lived hard, made some mistakes, as we all do. And Donald Trump is reflective of that same kind of persona in many ways. And so it seemed oddly appropriate that Trump would do that. And then I saw in some of the coverage of Trump's comments something I found a little interesting, and I'll allow you to try it on for size, and you can discern for yourself whether or not it is interesting. This is the New York Post on Saturday. Rob Manfred considering petition to remove Pete Rose from MLB's ineligible list. Less than 24 hours after President Trump said he plans to issue a complete pardon of Pete Rose over the next few weeks, ESPN reported that MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred is considering a petition filed by the family of 17-time All-Star in January that requested him to be removed from the sports ineligible list. According to ESPN, Jeffrey Lenkov, the lawyer, filed a petition after he and Rose's daughter Fawn met with Manfred at the end of last year. So the petition had been filed a few weeks ago. And I'm thinking, okay, so the petition came out. Trump knows about the petition, maybe or maybe not. But he certainly knew about it by the time he posted on Truth Social, one would think. He didn't just bring Pete Rose up out of nowhere. Do you think Pete Rose is going to be taken off the ineligible list? I would suspect that Pete Rose will absolutely be taken off the ineligible list. I would also suspect that Donald Trump knew that before Friday evening, or maybe he just heard on Friday, is what I'm saying. And at the point at which he finds out this thing is going to happen, or maybe he talked to Manfred and applied some pressure, whatever it was, I would assume that Donald Trump had foreknowledge of that, and that sparked his post. Now, when you look at it, it looks like, and it's going to look like to the American public, that Donald Trump was responsible for getting Pete Rose off the ineligible list. And maybe we'll find out that he actually was, but either way, he's going to be given credit for it because people will hear about Pete Rose with Trump's post. Enough people will hear about it so that if it ever comes up in conversation, someone there is probably going to know, oh yeah, Trump posted about that. In all the coverage of the Pete Rose being removed from the ineligible list story, there's going to be a note about how Donald Trump posted about it on Truth Social. And I bring this up because I think it's reflective of a dynamic that we see a lot, a way to frame things, a process that we see repeating, where Donald Trump has foreknowledge of something that's going to happen and gets himself involved in a very public way so that when the thing does happen, Donald Trump is given credit for it. Okay. And now a lot of people might then respond by saying, well, he's trying to take credit for things he's not doing. I don't know if he is or isn't, to tell you the truth. Possible that he is. But regardless, we're in an information war. And the key would be whether or not, quote unquote, we have it all. And by we, of course, I mean Donald Trump and the people around Donald Trump. And if you have it all, you would, of course, know that things like Pete Rose being removed from the ineligible list would be happening before the public knows about them. And so in that middle time, it's a matter of whether or not Donald Trump chooses to take advantage of that knowledge. So people might have an issue about something like that, morally speaking, because they might say he's taking credit for things he didn't do. On the other hand, we are, and I kind of talked about this just a little bit, maybe a week or two ago, but we're watching the implementation of this great reset agenda worldwide. And we're watching the implementation of various plans. We're watching these plans at work. And I've suggested now numerous times that it's probably not just the Great Reset plan versus the Trump plan, and that's it. There are probably a bunch of plans on that Great Reset side, all slightly different, based on the different factions that are operating to push that thing forward. But underneath everything, within that controlled opposition bubble, is going to be the advancement of that same agenda, more or less. Maybe different winners or losers in one plan than another, slight variations here and there, whatever. There's going to be lots of arguing and bickering. And again, that's one of the things that ends up bringing these people down, because they don't actually have any faith or loyalty or true allegiance to anything but their own purposes. They can work together when their goals are aligned, but when those goals diverge, then the backstabbing begins and things begin to break down. And I believe that we're seeing that process. So Trump has the plan that's working against that. Now, in the, I was going to download this. I was thinking you got to download that clip, cut that clip up, get it ready. And then I forgot which clip it was that I wanted to get ready. I was in the shower thinking about this clip. So I talked about this a couple of months back when Burning Bright and I did an episode of Story Hour on the movie Days of Thunder. And I talked about the concept, which is referred to as the slingshot and as drafting in this film. And I think that this is, I'll find a better version.
That guy you call?
No. It's just something Harry and I work on together. It's called drafting. One car tucks in behind another. Two cars can go faster than one. They divide the air resistance between them. Now here's where it gets interesting. The lead car has to floor it to hit 200 miles an hour, but the car that's tucked in behind doesn't. It can go just as fast and still have power in reserve. So when these two cars come off that last turn, the car that's in back can move out of the draft and slingshot past the lead car, beat it to the finish line.
So I think you probably understand the concept. And I think that Donald Trump, one of the key strategies that we see in the information war that we are witnessing is that Donald Trump employs that strategy often. He knows what the enemy is going to do. Some of the things they're going to do are going to have immediate, visible impacts that people will appreciate. Now, they might be taking things in a different direction, or they might just be going straight ahead. And some of the things in that Great Reset agenda will probably make people very happy. And it's the problem is the problem is that the agenda is ultimately anti-human, and it is designed to remove human liberty for all time, to build a society that is not the one we want at all. That doesn't mean that every element of what's going to happen the results of some of the steps of the implementation of that agenda are all themselves bad or would be recognized as bad. And maybe that's the most important part. So when there are good things that is doing, would it then make sense to take credit for those so that people, when they experience these good effects, will understand these good effects in through a lens that reflects an American ideology, a pro-American ideology, an ideology that is pro-nationalism, pro-sovereignty, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, however you want to describe it, a very pro-American ideology, so that people understand it is the American ideology that accomplishes these things, because it can be. And the good aspects of that agenda are being brought on by people's, what's the right word? Innovation, motivation, ambition, all these things that historically have driven American success forward are still in the mix, but many of these things are just heading in the wrong way. So if Donald Trump can take over a story and guide it toward these American ideologies, these pro-American ideologies, and people understand the success again and then re-embrace these ideas rather than thinking, oh, hey, everything good now is happening because of communism, and which leads them to ignore all the terrible things that are happening because of communism. I think that perhaps that is going in the direction of a win from an information war perspective. And I think that pattern might be something that we're seeing play out regularly as these situations evolve. And if that is, I hope that's making sense to everybody, I should say. Pause for a second, go to the chat. Goose 573, $20. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for all your support. That's me responding for those of you on the audio version. John in Connecticut, $20. You are among the brightest thinkers of contemporary cultural and social politics. You're one of the few voices condemning Reconstruction other than L.B. Bork, author of the Red Amendment. Thank you, John in Connecticut, and thank you for your support. Very kind words. I have checked out the Red Amendment as you have recommended for me to do multiple times. And I would be interested in a conversation with the guy. I haven't had enough time to really get deep on the website. I can see that we're very much on the same path as far as that part of my understanding about where we are politically goes. So trust that I have taken a look. I understand that I need to spend more time with it. I'm chasing so many things down so many paths at this point. So sometimes that gets a little difficult, but let's continue. So anyhow, I think that this idea of accepting that some of these things are good and then communicating them publicly in the ways that they are reflective of an American ideology is an appropriate method to be taken. And I'll try to hammer that point home a little better so that you can kind of understand the morality here, and that there is, and that the credit is actually being moved to the right place and wouldn't be otherwise. For instance, let's think about the kind of tech bro libertarian ideologies. Those ideologies are totally fine with smaller government. Many of the people professing those ideologies, and we'll focus on Peter Thiel in particular, J.D. Vance's owner. Peter Thiel wrote the foreword to the most recent edition of The Sovereign Individual. The Sovereign Individual was written by globalist normies who nonetheless saw that there would be changes in society. They thought those changes were going in a certain direction. A more recent and contemporary version of that book was written 26 years ago, is a man named Curtis Yarvin. And Yarvin is a brown, educated grandson of a communist who he believes helped defeat the Nazis. He is an interesting thinker, an interesting and entertaining writer, not so much the case when he is speaking. And I encourage you to watch interviews with him. It's not all there. He just basically rambles through historical stories. He's memorized entire segments of the official story and the counter narrative official story of many historical events, and he can just rattle them off one after the other and then suggest that they mean something. And because it's history, he's like, oh, well, I'm authoritative when I make these statements on what should happen. I'm not a big fan of his. I am a big fan of neo-reactionary Nick Land, who has done a lot of analysis of Curtis Yarvin's work, and I don't think reaches all the same conclusions. I also think Land is observing something culturally and intellectually that Yarvin's not exactly in touch with, just based on their different intellectual backgrounds. But Yarvin talks about the formation of these more individualized and localized, either city-states or smaller nation states, and that society just fragments further. And that might be where we're going. I don't know if that's where we're going or not. It could be. But within his ideology, and I suspect within parts of that ideology that Peter Thiel subscribes to, he is much more freedom and liberty oriented than someone who's interested in implementing the Great Reset agenda from the left. Now, Yarvin is a materialist, and I'm pretty sure that Thiel is as well. They both seem like kind of futurist techno-Kabbalists, basically. And they have a normie understanding of history as written. And I think that those are both just conversation enders as far as I'm concerned. But within that viewpoint, there are a lot of things that we could sign up for. Okay. It's not like the entire thing is just wrong or offensive. It's that the conclusions are wrong. And so to the extent that the techno-libertarians are driving some aspect of what this current Trump administration is, especially considering that they may not have wanted Trump to be involved anymore to begin with, well, then there are aspects of their ideology embedded in what's happening right now and embedded in that Great Reset agenda that Trump is also going to go along with. Okay. So it can be part of their agenda to remove massive chunks of the federal bureaucracy, which is a good thing, which comports with the original Constitution, but is nonetheless not part, or not ideologically so much part of that Great Reset. It is something that will happen under either plan. And we've talked many times about how I imagine they will probably remove these agencies from the federal government, then just control them privately, fund them through global philanthropists and other globalists, technocrats, global governance, etc. And they'll do the same thing privately, wielding the same influence privately. And I am suggesting that the techno-libertarians, as part of that Great Reset agenda, would be more than happy to have those organizations run privately and not by the federal government. Okay. So our interests are aligned on the shrinking and fragmentation of the federal government. So when that happens, and it's inevitable that it's happening, is Trump justified in saying, actually, you know what that is? That's not the Great Reset agenda. That is the promotion of American ideologies. And that is something that we desperately need. So he reroutes the credit for any advancement along those lines to himself and to the Make America Great Again agenda, to sovereign nationalism and sovereign nationalism worldwide. So I hope that helped all of this make sense. If it didn't, then I probably just wasted your time in extraordinary ways. But hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's go ahead and continue. And I think this is just incredibly interesting. I talked about this a little bit. John and I discussed it on Saturday night on Devolution Power Hour on Badlands. This is Donald Trump from Saturday afternoon on Truth Social. For processing, let me open this up. Here we are. The month of February, my first full month in office, had the lowest number of illegal immigrants trying to enter our country in history by far. There were only 8,326 apprehensions of illegals by Border Patrol at the U.S.-Mexico border, all of whom were quickly ejected from our nation or, when necessary, prosecuted for crimes against the United States of America. This means that very few people came. The invasion of our country is over. And I'm going to highlight that. The invasion of our country is over. In comparison, under Joe Biden, there were 300,000 illegals crossing in 1 month, and virtually all of them were released into our country. Thanks to the Trump administration policies, the border is closed to all illegal immigrants. Anyone who tries to illegally enter the U.S. will face significant criminal penalties and immediate deportation. The key there, as I said, the invasion of the country is over. Trump followed that up yesterday on Truth Social, saying, illegal border crossings last month were the lowest ever recorded. Thank you. All in caps with exclamation points. So the invasion is over, so says Donald Trump. Should we suspect that the invasion is over? I would say yes. 8,326 a month, 12 months. That's damn near 100,000 total for the year. That is a significant decline, and he's saying that they're getting kicked out when they enter. Now, for how long has the invasion been over? I would suggest much longer than 1 month. But these are the sorts of things we will learn about someday in the future. Again, I think that a lot of the stories that we witnessed over the last 4 years are things that are being rerun from history actually made in reality prior to that, much like the Ukraine war. For instance, I believe the immigration problem probably followed a very similar trajectory. And I think as one of the proofs of that, people should look back last year at the Unipartisan Compromise and the agenda for immigration that was not passed, blamed on Donald Trump. And then, nonetheless, the immigration problem began to rapidly decline, even within the central narrative, because the central narrative had already planned for a decline in immigration. They were just prepared to credit the Unipartisan Compromise with the decline in immigration. Instead, we can understand that the proper lessons to take about immigration are that the country must have enforceable borders so that we are not a borderless part of the global, international, rules-based liberal order. Now, the other thing about Trump noting that the invasion is over is that it takes away one of the pillars of Mike Johnson's new package. Part of that was going to be, the entire idea was that he was putting together a package that would implement Trump's full agenda. And he had these 5 pillars. Elon Musk reposted it. Mike Johnson did a little video. We talked about it briefly, I think, on Monday of last week. But part of that was the agenda at the border. And Johnson suggested that they needed to pass a budget. They needed to pass new legislation so that the border agenda could be implemented. Well, does the border agenda need to be implemented now if the invasion is already over? No, it doesn't. And because of that, we should understand that the Uniparty right in Congress and the MAGA-friendly members of the Uniparty right, who are nonetheless rhinos, like Chip Roy, for instance, when they are pushing for this budget that it must pass, the continuing resolution must pass, we must sign an extension, whatever it is, it must pass because we need to implement Donald Trump's agenda at the border, they're lying, just like they've always been lying. The Congress and the Senate are not going to help at the border. They never have before. None of their legislation has ever helped. The border doesn't require Congress or the Senate to help with its enforcement. The president can do that. The state governors can do that. And they all should be doing that. So the invasion is over. Why then would we listen to any GOP congressman or senator telling us that the budget must pass to fix the immigration problem? Now, plenty of people who are supporters of MAGA will go along with it. They'll say, yeah, we need Trump's border agenda implemented. Really? Trump already said the invasion is over. Well, I don't care. We still need to make sure that these immigrants stay out. We need laws in place to be able to do that. What? Are they siding with Donald Trump or the Uniparty right at that point? And why would they adopt beliefs like that if Trump says the invasion is over? Do they trust Trump? Turns out that in that situation, no, they don't. They actually trust the television. They trust the congressmen and the senators who can't even prove their own legitimacy in office, who sat there for the last 4 or 5 years accepting everything the government did, accepting that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, most of them. So why would we trust them? Because they say they're helping Donald Trump solve a problem that he says is already solved? Why would we want that? This is one of the nuances of the Uniparty understanding that absolutely must really take hold, because these people are supporting the Uniparty while saying they're supporting Donald Trump. And because of that, and because of people's concern about the immigration issue, they'll actually think that the Uniparty is going harder on the issue than Donald Trump is. Well, the Uniparty is saying we need to do something down at the border. And I understand that we really do have to do something down at the border. Cool. Well, Donald Trump says the invasion's already over. Which one do you believe? Oh, you believe the television, and you believe the congressmen and the senators because of the television, because all the mainstream podcasters, like the ones we saw at the White House last week, like Tucker and Bongino and The Blaze and the Daily Weimar and all of it, they all agree, got to pass this package so that we can take care of the border problems just like Donald Trump wants. Well, Donald Trump's made it clear that the invasion is over. And so when we think about the budget, initially we wanted one big, beautiful bill. The Senate, they need 2 bills. So that's impossible. Balance the budget. That's impossible. We heard Chip Roy say he might want a CR to go to June. And then Trump raised him and said, you know what? Let's just take it to September, the end of the fiscal year. Do they want that? Can the Republicans look good while passing a CR that funds the government for another 7 months and funds all those programs for another 7 months? I would suggest no. And so in messaging, in Trump's messaging, message after message, he has made an impossible task for the GOP establishment in the Congress and Senate. And he made it more impossible by letting everyone know that the invasion is over, which means that the congressmen and the senators can't use that as leverage in the media, in the information war sense any longer to convince the American people to support what they're doing. Okay. So he's making the task harder while also making it so people are less likely to support them in the accomplishment of that task. Okay. Which again makes the task harder. As far as I'm concerned, that seems like a very concerted effort to blow this thing up while keeping his hands completely clean. We don't want more continuing resolutions passed. We don't want more unaccountable spending in the federal government. And if we are able to get there on the 14th in 11 days, that would be quite nice. You know, I don't think I'm going to be able to find this, unfortunately. I looked for a bit this morning and could not find it. Steve Bannon, I don't know, a few weeks ago, was talking about things that would happen in March. He was saying that he was looking ahead to March 4th for the president's big speech, and then the time between March 4th and March 10th on getting the whole budget thing figured out. This is when all the drama is going to go down. And that is an interesting 10-day period. We are about to enter it tomorrow. I'm not trying to date fag. I don't know what's going to happen. But Bannon is someone who, in my estimation, has considerable insight into what is going to be happening and how those things will be messaged by all sides. And so I take him very seriously when he's talking about things like that. And Donald Trump, this morning, posted this. Tomorrow night will be big. I will tell it like it is. Tomorrow night is Donald Trump's speech before the joint session of Congress. Usually it's known as the State of the Union, but in the first year, as I said, of a new presidential administration, they will call it the speech before the joint session of Congress, which the State of the Union also is, but this one just doesn't have that special name. Now, March 4th is an interesting date because March 4th used to be the day of the presidential inauguration. And considering that we are at such an interesting point in our history right now, we have to look at this. Now, this is from the White House Historical Association, and you might see right here at the top, Rubenstein Center Scholarship. That's David Rubenstein. And this is part of the whole White House, what do they call it? The Center for White House History, I think is what it's called. So this is an article by an historian named Lena Mann, who's part of this organization. And if you go to the About section, you can see the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors, or whatever they call it. All prominent globalists, Goldman Sachs, etc. The origins of the March 4th inauguration. So we're going to get the regime's version, okay? This is the David Rubenstein approved regime version of this history. And if I do a stream tomorrow, we're going to talk, I think, some more about some of this history leading into that speech that will be tomorrow evening. Today, Inauguration Day falls on an exact day and time, January 20th at noon. Every 4 years, either the president or the president-elect, takes the oath of office. Since 1981, presidents have typically taken the oath on the west front of the United States Capitol building. The public ritual demonstrates America's commitment to democracy and signifies a peaceful transfer of power to citizens and people around the world. However, prior to ratification of the 20th Amendment in 1933, most inaugurations took place on March 4th at noon. Contrary to popular belief, this language does not appear in the original text of the United States Constitution, which begs the question, how did the March 4th inauguration date come to be? To answer this question, one can look to the last Congress convened under the Articles of Confederation. On September 12th, 1788, this legislative body voted to approve the following resolution. The first Wednesday in March next be the time, and the present seat of Congress the place, for commencing proceedings under the said Constitution. The first Wednesday in March 1789 just happened to be March 4th. This resolution established that this date would mark the start of the new federal government under the ratified Constitution. Despite this resolution, President George Washington's inauguration did not take place until April 30th, 1789. Although government operations were set to start on March 4th, logistical delays made this impossible. On that date, the House of Representatives and the Senate attempted to convene for the first time. However, both legislative bodies failed to reach a quorum, the minimum number of members required to conduct official business. The first few months of 1789 were particularly cold and snowy, delaying many members of Congress traveling to New York City, the temporary seat of government. According to the Constitution, the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. How about that? This meant that until a quorum could be established to count the electoral votes, the winner of the presidency and vice presidency could not be determined or certified. Eventually, on April 6th, 1789, enough members of Congress gathered to constitute a quorum. Once the electoral votes were counted, George Washington won the presidency unanimously with 69 electoral votes. Word of his victory reached Washington, and he made the journey to New York City from his Virginia plantation, Mount Vernon. Along the way, Washington was greeted with celebrations, dinners, and parades. He recorded his reception in New York City in his diary on April 23rd. The display of boats which attended and joined us on this occasion, with some with instrumental music on board, the decoration of the ships, the roar of cannon, and loud acclamations of the people, which rend the skies as I passed along the wharves, filled my mind with sensations as painful, considering the reverse of this scene, which may be the case after all my labors to do good, as they are pleasing. So that's quite a show, quite a display. Also interesting and of note, as I've said many times, the Articles of Confederation were meant to require 13 states to approve any changes at all. And then for the Constitution, they would just need 9 states to throw out that Articles of Confederation and approve a new Constitution. President Washington was finally inaugurated on April 30th, 1789. Washington arrived at the Federal Hall Senate chamber at 1 p.m. At 2 p.m., Washington was escorted to a balcony outside the chamber, decorated with red and white curtains, to take the oath of office as a crowd gathered below. Chancellor of New York, Robert Livingston, administered the oath, while Secretary of State Samuel Otis held the ceremonial Bible. Following the oath, Washington returned to the Senate chamber, where he delivered his inaugural address. Many elements of Washington's first inauguration still persist today, including taking the oath before a public audience, swearing on a ceremonial Bible, and delivering an inaugural address. After Washington's first inauguration, Congress then set the official inauguration day. On March 1st, 1792, Congress passed legislation that established inauguration on March 4th. And it be further enacted that the term of 4 years for president and vice president shall in all cases commence on the 4th day of March next, succeeding the day on which the votes of the electors shall be given. This legislation did not specify the time of the inauguration. However, notes from George Washington's cabinet meeting on February 28, 1793 included the following about his upcoming second inauguration. Monday, 12 o'clock is presumed to be the best time, but as the mode will be considered by the public as originating with the president, it is submitted to him for his decision. From this point forward, inaugurations were typically held on March 4th at noon. On March 2nd, 1801, Thomas Jefferson confirmed this precedent with a letter sent to the Senate President pro tempore, James Hillhouse. Quote, I beg leave through you to inform the Senate of the U.S. that I propose to take the oath which the Constitution prescribes to the President of the U.S. before he enters on the execution of his office on Wednesday the 4th at 12 o'clock in the Senate chamber. On March 4th, the March 4th inauguration date was further codified with the ratification of the 12th Amendment on June 15th, 1804. The 12th Amendment modified the way in which the Electoral College chooses the president and vice president, allowing these positions to be elected together. Previously, the candidate that won the most electoral votes became president, while the runner-up became vice president, meaning that they were from different political parties. It also mentioned March 4th. And if the House of Representatives shall not choose a president whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them, before the 4th day of March next following, the vice president shall act as president, as in case of the death or other constitutional disability of the president. And I was considering going through this whole thing, but it's getting a bit long here. We'll maybe do more of this tomorrow. But the point here being that this was the original way, the inaugural to be held on March 4th. And don't know what's happening tomorrow. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But that March 4th date could just be the Tuesday that worked out best for everyone this year, or there could be bigger meaning there. And I think that there's at least some reason to believe there's bigger meaning there because of what else is happening in the world, and because it is my, again, best estimation. I can't prove it to somebody who is going to conform to the normie version of history, the television version of what's happening in our society, the idea that Joe Biden was just an actual president who received 81 million real lawful American votes. But in my estimation, Donald Trump is tasked with returning the United States of America to its prior form as, at best, at least, a constitutional republic, and perhaps going back even further than the Constitution to the Articles of Confederation, and shrinking, fragmenting, devolving, destroying this fake and illegitimate federal government that we have been subjected to throughout our lives. And if tomorrow marks that date, I think that this would be symbolically important. I think we may see more to indicate that that's what's going on, and I could be wrong. Let's take a pause for a moment, and then we will continue. Just checking the chat. Everybody seems to be doing just fine. And you know what? Maybe this is the perfect time to take just a slight break. And we haven't done this clip in a while. Elon Musk talking about how the most entertaining outcome is also the most likely. And that would, my friends, be a very entertaining outcome.
But faith, the most ironic outcome is the most likely, it seems.
I'm stealing that. That's good.
That's actually a friend of mine, Jonah, came up with that one. I actually have a slight variant on that, which is the most entertaining outcome is the most likely. But that's entertaining as viewed from a third-party viewer.
Right.
Like, so if we're like an alien
from
TV
on
show.
High. Yes.
Yeah. Like you could go see a movie about World War I, and they're being blown to bits and gassed and everything in the trenches, and it's like you're eating popcorn and having a soda. You know, it's fine. Not so great for the people in the movie.
True.
But that's my variant on this sort of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is most likely. Jonah's variant, which is irony, and then my variant, which is the most entertaining as seen by a third-party audience, which seems to be mostly true.
Always a big fan of that one. Always a big fan of the entertaining aspects of what we are witnessing, except when those entertaining aspects are to hoodwink us. Many of them are. Many of those are being rerouted by Donald Trump. Okay. Where are we here? Let us go global. None other than Alex Soros posted this article on X, formerly Twitter. I think Elon Musk must have highlighted it, or perhaps someone else posted it last night, and it ended up in my feed. And I thought, I'm going to take a look at this. Interesting headline. Europe should hijack Trump's revolutionary plans for the world. And if you would like to read this article yourself or share it, it is in the info stream at t.me/I'm your moderator on Telegram. Listening to U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's address in Munich, looking at the results of Germany's subsequent parliamentary elections, I was reminded of East Berlin in 1989 and the collapse of the communist regimes across Eastern Europe. It was during the final weeks of the Soviet Empire in Europe that Mikhail Gorbachev, the reformist Soviet leader, told his hardline East German comrades that they risked being on the wrong side of history and, quote, danger awaits those who do not react to the real world, end quote. Vance made a similar speech telling Europeans that they were on the wrong side of President Donald Trump. But this message did not have the expected effect. Sure, it didn't. It turned out that Germany's radical leftist Die Linke party, and not the far-right Alternative for Germany, was the major beneficiary of Elon Musk's social media posts and Vance's warning. The other unexpected result was that Friedrich Merz, Germany's likely next chancellor, has been transformed overnight from an old-fashioned Atlanticist into a European Gaullist. Straight after the vote, Merz declared his readiness to fight for Europe's independence from the United States. And by all means, Europe, go right ahead. The Trumpian revolution has already changed the nature of European politics. Less than 2 months into the new White House administration's term, the European political scene has been transformed into a clash between Trump-allied revolutionaries and Trump-resisting, do not bully us, liberal nationalists. Again, great. Although also, again, these things could be just as scripted as the rest of it. And this could be the plan to explain the Great Reset agenda and its implementation from the Uniparty right equivalents in Europe and in global governance. Now it is for the far right to justify Trump's anticipated tariffs on Europe, threatened this week at 25%, and to ask Europeans to follow Washington's leadership in foreign policy. Oh, yes, I'm sure that they will be so upset to have to go along with Trump's policies. They're going to have to explain it. You guys explain it. I'm sure they're quaking in their boots. By contrast, mainstream parties are acting as defenders of national sovereignty who hope to mobilize support by appealing to national interest and national dignity. Again, go for it. The Munich conference also put an end to the heated debate about whether Trump should be taken seriously, meaning not literally, or literally, meaning not seriously. And that was an old trope from the first Trump administration, back from the very beginning. Oh, you see, Trump supporters, they take him seriously, but they don't take him literally. That's why your fact checks don't work. And then other times, of course, because the media needs to use Trump's words against him, in either scenario, they'll say, well, we need to take him literally, not just seriously. Krastev, I think is his name, Krastev, says, now we know that he should be taken both seriously and literally. And as Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, has aptly observed, Trump does not simply say what he thinks, but he says what he wants. His comments about taking control of Greenland or the Panama Canal represent not signaling, but intention. The U.S. president is convinced that America's strategic interest lies in making Canada the 51st U.S. state. He strongly believes that he can split Russia from China, and he blames America's deep state for preventing him from achieving that in his first term. In this context, Europeans are wasting precious time pondering what will be Trump's plan for Ukraine and complaining about not being at the negotiating table. Getting Trump right necessitates first and foremost recognizing that it is a revolutionary government in power in Washington, albeit one organized as an imperial court. Revolutions never have detailed plans. They run by timetables, meet the moment, don't project steps ahead. It is unclear what exactly Trump wants to achieve in his negotiations with Putin, but he wants to achieve something very big, and he wants to achieve it fast, very fast. Now, some of that might be true. We were also told for the last 2 years, year and a half, whatever, that the plan was the Project 2025 agenda. Apparently, that is no longer a thing that matters. What Trump offers Putin, he says, is not simply the prospect of ending the war in Ukraine on terms broadly favorable to Moscow, but a grand bargain to reorder the world. That's a big statement. Trump and Putin are about to implement a grand bargain in order to reorder the world? If you were the sort of person that looks at the liberal international rules-based order, that's the sort of thing you would like. And so that is appealing to me. I'm assuming it's probably appealing to everyone listening to this podcast. And here we have a writer in the regime mouthpiece outlet, the Financial Times, who's being highlighted by Alex Soros, saying that the agenda that we've been pointing toward for these last many years is being implemented by Donald Trump with Vladimir Putin. This is just short of admitting, oh yeah, there is actually this sovereign alliance out there opposing the liberal international rules-based order, the Great Reset agenda. It's incredible. This includes America's presence in Europe and also in the Middle East and the Arctic. Oh, the Middle East is involved? And the Arctic, huh? Trump promises Putin that Russia will be rapidly reintegrated into the global economy and that Moscow will regain the status of a great power that it lost in the humiliating 1990s. So the 1990s were the point at which the global regime was able to subdue in some way its ultimate enemy, Russia. And we're going to hear the reversal of this, the inversion, I should say, of this very shortly. Trump hopes this will convince Russia to sunder its alliance with China. I don't believe Donald Trump hopes that whatsoever. And I don't think anyone has seen any indication that that is Trump's intention, although that's how it's being projected by globalists to globalists, because what else are they going to say? Our whole system is about to collapse? The U.S. refusal in a UN vote to condemn Russia's aggression in Ukraine shocked even some of the president's most devoted admirers. But it was meant to persuade the Kremlin that the American leader is ready to do the unthinkable and reconfigure the world as shaped by Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev in the late 1980s. And was it Ronald Reagan that reshaped the world in a realistic version of history? Many people believe that after the assassination attempt against Reagan very early on in his first term was the point at which George H.W. Bush, the son of Prescott Bush, the former head of the CIA, globalist and industrialist and global industrialist, his father, of course, was an industrialist partnered with Nazi Germany, that guy took control of the Reagan administration and did that for 8 years and then carried it on for another 4 years himself in office. So Ronald Reagan, as the man who destroyed Soviet communism, well, that's an awfully hard rendition of history to sell effectively when you can see exactly what that global regime that accomplished the destruction of communism has become. George H.W. Bush was the guy who is on the famous video talking about the implementation of a new world order. And he's also the guy that opened the American markets to China. No one is more responsible for America as a lever of globalism and global communism than George H.W. Bush, I would argue. Maybe Henry Kissinger, maybe Morning Mika's dad, Brzezinski. I said, sorry. I just combined Zbigniew with Brzezinski and made it Zabinski. Brzezinski. So this sentence is awfully interesting. Let's read it again. But it was meant to persuade the Kremlin that the American leader is ready to do the unthinkable and reconfigure the world as shaped by Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev in the late 1980s. And so that is the world shaped by the New World Order, by Brzezinski, Kissinger, and George H.W. Bush. So Trump is ready to do the unthinkable and reconfigure that with a country that has remained sovereign and oppositional to the global regime for a lot longer than we have. Very interesting. What will happen to Trump's revolutionary dreams is a separate question. It is one of those ironies of history that Russians are greeting Trump's determination to remake the world with a guarded enthusiasm that recalls the cautious U.S. response to Gorbachev almost 40 years ago. What Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, is saying today is not so different to what Dick Cheney, then the U.S. Defense Secretary, said in 1989. We must guard against gambling our nation's security on what may be a temporary aberration in the behavior of our foremost adversary. So the claim here is that Lavrov is expressing the same sorts of doubts about what the United States under Donald Trump will actually do and will actually do long term, whether or not Donald Trump makes these moves now. They're doubting that the Trump, MAGA, America First hold on American politics will be something that lasts in the long term, or whether it's transferred right back over to the same global communists, which is their plan. And then it would be run into the future by someone like a J.D. Vance or a Ron DeSantis. And maybe I should ask the machine, but there were rumors today that Kamala had somehow announced her intentions to run again for fake presidents in 28. Let me see about that. Hold for processing. I'm not finding anything last. Now, perhaps that was just one of those things that appears on the internet. That would be hilarious, though. Let's close out this article. George Orwell once observed that all revolutions are failures, but they are not all the same failure. What kind of failure the Trumpian revolution will be, we do not know. But what history teaches us is that the best strategy is not to resist the revolutionaries, but to hijack their revolution. In doing this, Europe's success will mostly depend not on its ability to resist, but on displaying a talent to surprise. Could Europe find a way to benefit from not being at the U.S.-Russian negotiating table? Should Trump be left to own his great peace plan, for Ukraine and its implementation? In a moment of existential crisis like the present one, there is one valuable resource for the weaker party that stands out: political imagination. Now, what Krastev describes right here is exactly what I just described in terms of giving credit and taking credit and drafting a la Days of Thunder. What history teaches us is that the best strategy is not to resist the revolutionaries, but to hijack their revolution. I would argue that that is exactly what Donald Trump and MAGA are doing to their revolution. And their revolution is the Great Reset. Bernie Sanders called for revolution. We need a political revolution in this country. We also have, we know about the Great Reset agenda and what that intends to do. They are entirely reforming our culture in countless ways. The UN's 2030 agenda, the 17 pillars of that. That is a revolution that is being hijacked. And the good qualities of that revolution are being guided by and steered toward and messaged toward American ideology. While the rest of it, the aspects that represent the evil twin, the move, the push toward centralization, top-down government at a global level, that is the revolution that's being hijacked by Trump. They are suggesting that they're going to hijack it back. They would have to regain control of the control apparatus that they seem to have lost: the media, finance, trade resources, trade routes, and ultimately Team America World Police. Now, they believe that they're going to reform some kind of strengthened European Union, and that will be the new center for their military production or whatever. They're going to somehow form these militaries and make their own United States out of Europe. I strongly doubt there's any chance that that effort will be successful. Now, we talk often about these stories that will eventually rerun, and let's go to the Financial Times one more time. Again, one of the primary elite mouthpieces of the global regime. The Economist is another, Project Syndicate is another. And if you want to get what they're actually trying to convince their people to believe, and I mean their people like their high-level people, people who are actually in the corporate world, in the financial world, people who want the kind of elevated take on everything. This is what regime-aligned rich people are supposed to believe according to the regime. Putin ally pushes deal to restart Nord Stream 2 with U.S. backing. A former spy and close friend of Vladimir Putin has been engineering a restart of Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Europe with the backing of U.S. investors, a once unthinkable move that shows the breadth of Donald Trump's rapprochement with Moscow. The efforts on a deal, according to several people aware of the discussions, were the brainchild of Matthias Warnig, an ex-Stasi officer in East Germany, who until 2023 ran Nord Stream 2's parent company for the Kremlin-controlled gas giant Gazprom. Warnig's plan involved outreach to the Trump team through U.S. businessmen, the people said, as part of back-channel efforts to broker an end to the war in Ukraine while deepening economic ties between the U.S. and Russia. Some prominent Trump administration figures are aware of the initiative to bring in U.S. investors, according to officials in Washington, and they see it as part of the push to rebuild relations with Moscow. While there have been several expressions of interest, one U.S.-led consortium of investors has drawn up the outlines of a post-sanctions deal with Gazprom, according to one person with direct knowledge of talks who declined to disclose the identity of prospective investors. Senior EU officials became aware of the Nord Stream 2 discussion in recent weeks. Leaders of several European countries are concerned and have discussed the matter, according to several officials with knowledge of the discussions. One of Nord Stream 2's two pipelines was blown up in sabotage attacks in September 2022 that destroyed both pipelines of its older sister project, Nord Stream 1. The other Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which has an annual capacity of 27.5 billion cubic meters of natural gas, is undamaged, but has never been used. Isn't that amazing? So there were two pipelines. Well, there are two sets of pipelines. There was Nord Stream 1. Then we have Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 is two pipelines. One of them got damaged. The other one was just fine, but it's never been used. The latest plan would, in theory, give the U.S. unparalleled sway over energy supplies to Europe, the people said, after EU countries moved to end their dependence on Russian gas in the aftermath of the invasion. But now, because that sounds like an enormous win, the U.S. and Russia would be at the head of the table worldwide, so to speak. But we understand the emergence of this multipolar world order. And if we are moving away from American empire, and it seems that's what we are doing, not to say that we're not moving, or I should say, it's not to say that we are moving away from American dominance. It's just about moving away from American empire to the point where we are actually in all of these countries, overthrowing governments, keeping them overthrown, keeping them within the global regime's order of how the world is supposed to operate through military, whatever else. Moving away from that, and our influence on other nations will be through trade practices, like good neighbors. But they say the obstacles are considerable. It would require the U.S. to lift sanctions against Russia, meaningless sanctions from global central bankers, don't matter at all. Also, Trump would probably have no problem doing that. Russia to agree to resume sales it cut off during the war. Why would they not agree to that? And Germany to allow the gas to flow to any potential buyers in Europe. It would be strange at a very minimum to imagine Germany would take responsibility for cutting off energy resources to the rest of Europe that has already not gone well for any part of Europe over the last few years, to the extent that any of the central narrative about resource control and the cause of the problem being, if you remember Cy Hirsch, that Ukrainian intelligence was responsible for taking out one of the two Nord Stream 2 pipelines and Nord Stream 1. All of that, to the extent that the comedic actor in Ukraine is fully controlled the whole time, and maybe not by them. To the extent that Ukrainian intelligence getting involved in projects like this alone would be highly unusual. Hirsch claimed that it was American intelligence involved as well. All this is very strange. Now, I said many times that I did not, of course, take the official story on the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. It sounded a little ridiculous. And when things get cut off, when we are told that they got cut off, but there's no way to directly prove something like that, and in this case, there wouldn't be, well, then it could just be that they turned the switch off. And they just said, oh, well, that's not going to supply gas any longer. And now they're going to turn the switch back on. Totally possible. In fact, I think it's probably likely. We've discussed the same sort of dynamic with everything from cyber attacks on pipelines like the Colonial Pipeline, various cyber attacks on data centers or whatever else. There's no reason to believe a cyber attack actually happened that shuts down resources anywhere when there's a switch that also does the exact same thing. And that switch is controlled by the same people claiming the cyber attack. The cyber attack is then totally unnecessary and just a narrative element used to change public perception of what's happened and then to kind of manufacture consent for whatever response is intended by the people with the switch. And we discussed a very similar dynamic last week with the fake bomb threats in the Principles First conference. Someone calls in a bomb threat. The hotel evacuates. There's no bomb. There was never anything substantial or substantive about any of the claims. So why would we even need the bomb threat to be called in? Do we need to involve another person? Or does someone just hand whoever receives that call $10,000 and they're like, oh my gosh, I just got a bomb threat? Anybody could do that. So the evacuation actually happens, and that makes the event real. It makes it feel real. It makes it seem real. So everybody just believes the event as described throughout the entire story, because the effect of that story is the same, whether or not the story's true, whether or not any of the elements of the story even happened. All right? You can just start halfway in and create the same effect. So why believe the story? Why believe that anything actually happened? Very similar here. Continuing. The U.S. would say, well, now Russia will be dependable because trustworthy Americans are in the middle of it, said a former senior U.S. official. who was aware of some of the deal-making efforts. The U.S. investors would collect money for nothing, he added. And they go down through some of this discussion here. Where are we with the sanctions? I forgot there was one more paragraph that I wanted to nail here. Oh, here we are. The complex ownership structure of Nord Stream 2 presents serious potential obstacles for any investment. Nord Stream 2 is 100% owned by Gazprom, but 5 European energy companies, Shell, Uniper, OMV, Engie, and Wintershall, collectively provided around half of its $11 billion construction costs through loans. All 5 European companies have written off those debts. It's really interesting. The German government in 2022 pulled the plug on the licensing procedure of Nord Stream 2 and never issued the paperwork required to operate it. Ownership of the pipeline could, in theory, give U.S. investors a lever to control Russian gas flows to Europe, which is a key market for U.S. liquefied natural gas exports shipped across the Atlantic in tankers. But former senior U.S. officials and Western businessmen with experience investing in Russia said Trump and Putin's sign-off alone would not be enough to get Nord Stream 2 up and running. Really? A former senior U.S. official said, I can't imagine the board of any major U.S. corporation saying, hey, let's jump back into the Russian market right now. And the Russians know this too. They've seen these oscillations in American policy. Europe still has sanctions in place, and Germany signing up for the rehabilitation of Nord Stream would cause huge rifts. Anything like that is a ways off. Is it? This is a huge leverage point. Why would we assume that the sanctions could matter at all? Or that U.S. investors would somehow be skeptical of this plan based on what Europe might do? Europe has proven clearly that it is a paper tiger with no leverage whatsoever when it comes to virtually anything. And essentially, neither are the bankers. Now, let's just remind ourselves a bit about the situation with Nord Stream and how Vladimir Putin responded when asked about it by Tucker Carlson, the guy who wanted to be in the CIA but just didn't quite get there.
And mercenaries from Georgia in third place. Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever. and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that?
Yeah, don't you know that, Tucker? Why did he bring up the CO2 emissions? He's like worried about the environmental impact. Tucker Carlson is. Who wrote those talking points for him? It's kind of incredible, isn't it? So Putin didn't seem to take that all that seriously. Didn't seem to have any anger in his eyes when he was answering those questions. He was mocking and making fun of Tucker Carlson and American intelligence and American propaganda media, global propaganda media, global intelligence. Quite an interesting answer. Did the Nord Stream 2 pipeline ever get attacked? I would assume the answer to that is no. And I know that that really upsets people because people have spent a lot of time researching it and a lot of time figuring out what it means that it got attacked. But when something doesn't have to happen, something major, an obvious psyop with no substantial explanation from the central narrative, what's the answer? I would assume that it didn't happen, which would explain why they're never able to answer these questions. And because it doesn't need to happen, why would we spend time trying to figure out what did happen? The situation seems to be resolved. It seems to be resolved in a way that will benefit the United States of America and Russia in a way that gives them an unassailable leverage point over all of Europe. This is what we have talked about over months now in terms of the control of the North Seas, the Arctic, and the limiting of the global regime in their control over resources and trade routes. And then obviously you heard Putin address the propaganda media and the financial institutions of the global regime. All that's left at that point is military. Very interesting. Let us continue. Donald Trump actually came out discussing oil and gas today. Europe has spent more money buying Russian oil and gas than they have spent on defending Ukraine. By far. Amazing timing for that post, sir. Let's switch gears just a little bit. General Flynn posted this video today, though I do not know what the date on this video is. I believe it is perhaps from this weekend, but very recent. This is Viktor Orban.
As a Hungarian prime minister, I should shut up always, you know? It's not written anywhere. So I am here to represent the national interest of Hungary. And on that basis, I would like to make deals, agreements, compromises, whatever, with the other country leaders who represent their own national interest. So I don't represent the globalist elite here, or the European bureaucrats, or somebody who is just, swimming on the sky. No, it's not my job. I'm standing firmly on the basis of the national interest. And I would like to make deal, compromise, agreements with the others who represent also their national interest, because Hungary first. You are from Germany. I suppose for you, Germany is the first. That's right. So let's sit down and understand what is good for the Germans, what is for the Hungarians. You are big, we are smaller. Let's make a deal how to cooperate. That's European politics. Not to say that you should follow the unity, shut up. That's what you are saying. It's impossible. It's impossible.
That's a very strong statement in an official body toward sovereign nationalism for the countries of Europe, and the fact that Orban does not have to conform to the consensus demanded by the global regime. He's there to represent Hungary and Hungary alone and represent the best interest of the Hungarian people. Let's get back to Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor in Ukraine, and his meeting in Washington on Friday. That hubbub. He then headed to Europe. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, addressed some of this yesterday on CBS's Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan.
Margaret, it is impossible to have an economic deal without a peace deal. The sine qua non for an economic deal is that Ukrainian leadership wants a peace deal.
I thought this was a building block towards getting to
Well, it was supposed to be, but President Zelensky came into the Oval on Friday. There were three things that were going to be done. There was going to be a press conference. There was going to be a private lunch with 16 of us. And as you can see from Dan Scavino's the post on his X account, we were already set up to sign the deal. So it's unclear now. President Zelensky has thrown off the sequencing. And Margaret, let me tell you the most tragic part of this. The President Trump's idea for this economic arrangement was to further intertwine the American people and the Ukrainian people and show no daylight, to show the Russian leadership that there was no daylight. And President Zelensky came into the Oval Office and tried to relitigate in front of the world the deal. And the place to have done it would have been in the private lunch.
So as we know, the deal fell apart. Bessent is placing the blame for that solely with Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor from Ukraine, accused him of blowing the deal up. Zelensky was recently interviewed by NBC's Kristen Welker. I thought this was particularly interesting. Where are we? Very strange. Could swear I had this right here. Oh, goodness gracious. There it is.
Ukraine survive without U.S. military support?
And as you might see on screen there, February 14th was the date on this discussion.
Probably it will be very, very, very difficult. And of course, in all the difficult situations, you have a chance, but we will have low chance to survive without support of the United States. I think it's very important, critical. But I mean, I don't want to think about it. Yes, we have to think about it. I don't want to think that we will not be strategic partners. I don't want to think about it because it will make a pressure on morality of Ukrainians, and it will be worse the thing from the very beginning of the war. But we increased our production. That we really can count on our level of defending industry, but it's not enough.
Your concern being without U.S. military support, Ukraine would be vulnerable to another attack by Russia in another few years. Is that your concern?
Yes, I think this can be. This is really what he wants. He wants pause, prepare, trained, take off some sanctions because of ceasefire and etc.
So he's saying that Ukraine has very low chances of survival without American military help. And all of this is playing into Putin's hands because what Putin wants is this ceasefire so that he can build up the defense industry, train new troops, just take that pause for a while and then go attack again. It's all just on the assumption that Putin wants to take over all of Europe, and any deal by Putin will be broken. So Zelensky got kicked out of the White House, as the story goes. He was supposed to have lunch, and instead, other people ate his lunch, literally and figuratively. What a story. And then he began to immediately start crawling back. Oh, I need Donald Trump's help. I need the United States' help. But he didn't apologize, and he didn't thank them enough not to please J.D. Vance. We'll skip that for now. But this is the New York Post from this weekend. Zelensky went back to Europe. He met with European leaders, and then he met the man that pretends to be king. Ukraine Zelensky meets King Charles III in UK after getting kicked out of White House by President Trump. And so I just wanted to share some of these beautiful pictures. This is not exactly what you would call a state visit like the one Donald Trump is going to be getting. Volodymyr Zelensky appeared next to the pretend king, the lord of this global commonwealth, and wore a sweatsuit. So it was disrespectful to come into the Oval Office, to come to the White House and meet with Donald Trump in the sweatsuit. And he went and did the same thing in the UK with the guy that people call the king. That's crazy, isn't it? I mean, always in our lives, I think that everything we've been indoctrinated to believe about the royal family is that there are all these rules and customs. There's all this false decorum that has to be abided by when people visit the United Kingdom and when they get to meet with the royal family. Donald Trump was just invited for an unprecedented second state dinner. And here's the wartime fake president, the comedic actor Volodymyr Zelensky, wearing his sweatsuit to meet with the king. So apparently all that decorum is just out the window now. It's almost like this is a humiliation ritual for these people. And I just want to pull this picture up again because it's important to remember exactly how all of this really did go down in the past. Let's see if I can find it here. I thought I sent it to John the other day. I'll just pull up another version of it. That'll be fine. Hold for processing. The famous old picture of Donald Trump walking. Oh, I love this. If you don't look specifically for Trump walking in front of her, it's all just pictures of them walking side by side. That's funny. It's not a big thing, but it does kind of tell you what the machine's preference is or what it wants to show in a situation like this. Trump apparently was not supposed to do this right here. She's like sneaking around him. He's not paying attention to her at all, just standing in front of her, blocking her out. That was not supposed to happen. And then we have Zelensky showing up in his sweatsuit. And you have to wonder, you have to ask yourself, if Donald Trump, if the greatest aspect of his initial meeting was how much his actions and his lack of sophistication embarrassed not only him, but the country and shamed the royal family, these great people who deserve better treatment. Why would he be invited for another state dinner by this king sort of character? Moving on, he also had a meeting with European leaders, and we have some pictures of this. We'll get into some more of that in just a second. But here he is with Giorgia Meloni of Italy. And we are told that she's the very based and red-pilled sovereign nationalist in Italy. They told us, the media did, that she was a fascist and this was the rise of the far right, blah, 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 as they always say. And you have to wonder if she's just the same sort of actor that Volodymyr Zelensky is. Here is their very formal meeting, all these special members of Globo Homo gathered in one place. And let's look at just how gay these people are. Here is the ridiculous pomp and circumstance of the Zelensky meeting.
Can Ukraine win the war without America, Mr. President?
You may have just heard there, can you try to win the war without America, Mr. President? So we have these Q-tip shaped people. And then we have a red carpet right here Oscars were last night. Virtually no news about the Oscars, not even in normie news, except for, of course, Robert De Niro. And maybe this is the right time to plug that in. Where is he? Here it is. So Robert De Niro being strong in his resistance as always, boldly standing up to Donald Trump. And, you know, if the kids are in the room, earmuffs.
I'm going to say one thing. Fuck Trump.
Quite an ovation.
It's no longer down with Trump. It's fuck Trump.
That's really impressive, isn't it? And he is showing that Hollywood is still just as retarded as it has been. That was most of the people in that room getting up and standing for an ovation. How was that for real? Did all that happen? Seems like it did. Could they have done that through the magic of television? Obviously, of course, they could have. But that is still the message. Now, this was one of the woke Oscars, I guess, where they've put in their quote unquote DEI policies. They want to make sure that if a movie is going to be nominated, then it meets all the different criteria in terms of putting minorities in certain roles, etc. I don't know anybody who watched that thing. I certainly didn't watch it. I saw one clip from Conan making some joke about how they were halfway through the show, which means Kendrick Lamar is going to come out and call Drake a pedophile. Oh, hilarious joke. Conan says he's lawyered up, blah, blah, blah. So now you've gotten the whole point of the Oscars. A bunch of movies that no one bothered seeing apparently got awards for stuff no one cares about anymore. I used to be a big fan of the Oscars. Award season in Hollywood is a lot of fun because it's just nonstop parties. Everybody in, all the men are in suits and ties. The women are all in great dresses. Parties at various hotels all over the city. Production company parties, whatever. Just nonstop parties. All of them free alcohol, free food. People arriving in limos, just Klieg lights everywhere. It's like the most glamorous time of the year. And when you have access to all those parties and you like doing that sort of stuff and networking, seeing and being seen, which was, my professional life and also just something I had fun doing, man, it was a great time. Everybody just seemed like they were totally into that and not much else. And now, gosh, it all just seems so preposterous and absurd and useless. And I imagine that many of you probably feel that way as well. But let us continue. So we have Volodymyr Zelensky's pomp and circumstance.
Can you save your relationship with President Trump? Can you still get a peace deal, Mr. Zelensky?
Can you save your relationship with President Trump? Can you still get a peace deal? For those just listening, Zelensky and Starmer are hugging and rubbing one another and getting their pictures taken on this red carpet. And all of the leaders had these same entrances, one by one. Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, this Merz character, or maybe it was Schultz from Germany, Maloney, all these people, just like the red carpet at the Oscars that took place last night. I think that this was from Saturday, but same weekend. These red carpet arrivals. Oh, what is she wearing? Oh, she looks just fabulous. Oh, Volodymyr Zelensky walking up in, what is that? Champion Athletics? Who designed that? Is that Dolce & Gabbana? No, it's Under Armour. Ridiculous. Here we have Newsweek. Zelensky meets King Charles as calls go to cancel Trump UK state visit. Well, Trump can't deserve a state visit after he and J.D. Vance were inappropriate with the comedic actor. And again, the party of false decorum alters their rules of decorum in whatever ways they see fit at any time. It's not like underneath the false decorum, there is just this foundation of moral and principled behavior. It's just whatever we want at any given time, we're going to destroy people's image with these series of claims. Of course, you're able to do that when you control all media. So Charles received Zelensky at Sandringham. Sandringham? That's probably how they say it. They probably have an even dumber way of saying it. I don't know. The royal family posted on an X, formerly Twitter, this evening, His Majesty the King received the President of Ukraine at Sandringham House. Ukraine flag. The royal family? The United Kingdom? Their royal family account, their official one, as you can see from that Twitter badge, is posting the flag of Ukraine. Now, are the royal families owned by the crown in the city of London? Yes. Who are they? If there's one thing I know, it's that it is a conspiracy theory to suggest that they might be the Khazarian mafia or, the Catholic Church and the Orsinis. The Pope, by the way, is apparently still alive. Now he's going to go on ventilation. They have to just keep the Pope alive for an indeterminate amount of time. Will the Pope be announced dead tomorrow? Seems like maybe a good day. Or March 14th, 15th. Could happen at any point. I mean, he's already dead, of course. But the announcement of his death is what really matters. So the meetings, oh man. Polymath Anon just did a $5 Rumble rant that says Una Panuna Banca. And, when you say Una Panuna... Una Panuna Banca. Candyman. Una Panuna Banca just appears. I didn't do it. He did it. He also said, and the human condom, by the way, is not endorsed. Yeah, he's not endorsed yet. The human condom, of course, is J.D. Vance, who protects Donald Trump from the same sorts of attacks from the Uniparty right that he used to be subject to nonstop in the first administration. With J.D. Vance there, anytime they attack Donald Trump, if J.D.'s right next to him, well, he can just be like, are you going to attack your guy? This is your guy. You can't just destroy his reputation the way that you can destroy my reputation. You can't very well call Donald Trump unsophisticated, out of control, a narcissist, an egomaniac, an immature child, all that, without applying the same thing to J.D. Vance. Now, the Uniparty left can get away with doing that, but the Uniparty right cannot get away with doing that. So they have to amend all their attacks in different ways, and the attacks against Trump are thereby blunted. So J.D. Vance is the human condom. He is prophylactically protecting Donald Trump from the disease of the Uniparty right and from potentially having more Uniparty righties. Love it. Okay, so what did they actually discuss over the weekend? We talked on Saturday night on Devolution Power Hour about how there was a promise of $2.8 billion annually to Ukraine from Europe. And that money would be the interest on the roughly $300 billion seized from Russian elites and oligarchs and from state-owned Russian companies by the central banks. Now, if they take all that money, and that's the money that's been discussed for 3 years now, through all of this, they're trying to release this $300 billion so that they can redeploy this money rather that they've essentially seized from Russian companies and individuals. And that threatens, the story goes, to blow up the United States dollar as the global reserve currency. Because if the regime fiat bankers who have branded their fiat currency and intertwined it with the US dollar, if they're just going to begin seizing wealth and assets and then using it for whatever they want, well, all of a sudden, they're just obviously no longer trustworthy partners, and whatever financial influence they have would immediately begin to evaporate. So rather than going full bore into that, which they may do very soon, these are the sorts of hints that we would get on those types of things. And maybe some of that global financial collapse will be blamed on a government shutdown. Isn't that convenient that the government shutdown in the United States of America would have the same impact vis-a-vis the US dollar and America's financial credit rating with the rest of the world as the redeployment of these seized Russian assets? These two things will have the same effect. Which one is going to be responsible? Would it be Donald Trump causing the government shutdown in the United States of America that collapses America's financial standing as the holder of the world reserve currency? Or would it be the redeployment of those seized assets, which they've been striving for 4 years? So we have a false start situation, which is going to kind of dictate what the people will believe about the cause of this quote unquote financial disaster that is inevitable. And of course, part of the Great Reset, because they want to go to their global central bank digital currency. They have many aspects of that now with the fiat American dollar. But if Donald Trump is going to be able to maybe potentially drain and unwind some of that money printing and reverse the printing of that money by eliminating dollars from the money supply, if he's able to do that and then place the blame elsewhere, then maybe we have a win-win. It is a necessary component of what we're going to see happening. So it's a matter of how it's messaged and what is ultimately responsible for it, and then what people perceive to be responsible for it. The global regime can't win the messaging war, which really puts them in a bind with all this stuff. So the money is promised. That money is the interest on those seized assets, which they can argue more coherently, at least, that this isn't actually your money. And even though it kind of would be, but a different impact, narratively speaking. Let's continue forward. So that's one of the outcomes. Here is another. This is the ridiculous commie fake prime minister of the United Kingdom, who is, I mean, a British Commonwealth prime minister is 100% a puppet. They're not even elected. The monarch has to approve of their quote unquote election. So to think that they are exercising any power or authority of their own is preposterous, but here he is.
First, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine now. Second, we agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. Third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion. Fourth, we will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now, we need to deliver together. Finally, we agreed that leaders will meet again very soon to keep the pace behind these actions and to keep working towards this shared plan. We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead, and to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace. Thank you.
So all the talk is about how they're going to do this without the United States of America. And absent an attack on a NATO country by Russia, and there is no chance of that happening, America's basically out. There's no more Team America World Police. What's the future of NATO? We'll talk about that in a little bit. And we'll continue in a second, actually. Let's just take a quick break for a Rumble ad. I cannot promise it's going to be as good as the read the other day. Man, didn't see that one coming, but that was fun. So this time I'm actually doing an ad for a company that I support called Positive. And I support Positive because I have a wonderful little dog that I care a great deal about, and I want him to be very healthy. But I also don't trust vets any more than I trust doctors after the very deadly pandemic. And as of right now, right this second, I don't particularly trust the Rumble ads either, because it didn't pop up. Pop up. It's a dog pun. But now the ad has disappeared forever. So perhaps this was a better ad read than the read on Friday. And wow, totally screwed on that. But hey, Positive. Check them out some other time when I read the ad. Maybe you guys even saw the QR code pop up, but I sure didn't. EC was here, says the first rule of Pet Club is don't talk about Pet Club. And I guess the first rule of Positive is you're not able to talk about Positive if the ad doesn't come up. So, hey, and then he found the link. Wonderful. Perhaps the ad did come up. I guess we'll find out some other time. But Positive is basically a company that supplies a pet med box so that if your pet gets sick, you can't go to the vet or you don't trust doctors for your dog, you will have some emergency supplies to be able to take care of your fine furried friend, which is very, very important in life in general, and especially if you are a pet owner. If you're not a pet owner, I don't know what you're doing with furry friends. Let's go to the Independent UK. 20,000 troops. We only have 25 main battle tanks working at best. What? So we're supposed to believe that these countries that can barely afford to keep the lights on, that don't really have industries, they get subsidized by American work as part of that global regime. They get subsidized by America taking care of all of their defense functions. These countries can't actually survive on their own, much as Canada cannot, with the way their societies are set up. And America's going to back out, and they're supposed to be able to defend themselves collectively with Ukraine. No chance, no leverage, as we've discussed many times. Now the admissions are just coming right out. When news that the UK would be at the front of the queue to provide troops for a Ukraine peacekeeping force, possibly as many as 20,000, a contact from Army headquarters at Andover messaged me, "Where's this 20,000 figure come from? Who's briefing this? We couldn't do this in a month of Sundays." The next few days saw this offer drop to 10,000 to 12,000 troops for the as yet unspecified ground force. But the panic among Army planners was much the same. There's been no requirement for such a deployment. The Army is not set up for such numbers and has not been funded to do so. And worse, the Army is at a nadir as regards its capability to provide robust, capable warfighting forces of the type that would be needed for Ukraine. Equipment is either ancient, non-existent, yet to arrive. Ammunition stocks would not last a week if push came to shove. And communication systems are old and flaky. It might not go too far to suggest that the British Army is at its lowest nadir since June 1940, after Operation Dynamo saw the British Expeditionary Force evacuated from Dunkirk. Now the main battle tank force is at a disastrous low. The Challenger 2 fleet, just over 400, were bought in the 1990s, has a notional strength of 213 tanks after 14 were donated to Ukraine. However, these have been at the receiving end of malign neglect. Maintenance regimes slashed in the 2000s and 2010s, spares not purchased, and supply chains disappearing as companies went bust. In 2023, it was reported that only around 160 of the fleet was in any fit state to be used on operations after extensive, expensive work, and the situation got worse. And the article goes on from there. I would suggest if you are interested, you go ahead and read that. But there's nothing there. They can't get 10,000 troops. They have no tanks. Starmer's talking about boots on the ground and planes in the air to supply a peacekeeping force to Ukraine. The entire eastern third of Ukraine is already Russia. Crimea is already Russia. The whole thing is probably already Russia. I can't imagine Russia recognizes it as a real country. There would be no reason to. They don't have a real president. They don't have elections. The regime's businesses that they put all that time and effort and money into creating seem to be seized and being redeployed. We talked about that last week. And they're going to go defend what? With what? They would need to rebuild their economies so that they could fund the rebuilding of their armies. And then at that point, we're supposed to believe that they're going to defend Ukraine. What are they going to do? Try to take over all of Europe? They don't seem to be in control of Europe. If Russia and the United States control their energy resource supply, these people are screwed. And they're still talking an awful lot. It's really incredible. Reuters today tells us Trump threatens to lose patience as Europeans float proposals. Actually, you know what? Let's pause this for 1 second. I'm going to come back to this. I want to share one more post from an Albanian political analyst. Where did it go? Here it is. Gunter Fellinger-Jean says, "I call to confiscate all American military assets in Europe and hand it over to our emerging European army in case of America leaving NATO." And I would suggest that unless that is a plan in the sense of the military equipment being left in Afghanistan to arm very pro-sovereign European factions, there would be no other possibility of anything like this happening. Europe is going to seize, confiscate American military assets, of which there are many in Europe. That sounds insane. And of course, they have the graphic here if you are taking in the video version of how many bases the United States military has in Europe. 119 in Germany, 6 in Norway, 4 in Poland, 2 in Hungary, 6 in the Netherlands, 25 in the United Kingdom. Looks like 1 there in Ireland, 11 in Belgium, 44 in Italy. That's Team America World Police being the world police. And we're not going to be the world police anymore. So what happens if the United States were to pull out? Or, from a European perspective, maybe worse, what happens if the United States stays there with those bases, pursuing an agenda that is entirely antithetical to the global regime agenda? It would be like the United States and Russia are in total control of a big chunk of the world. And you've got Bolsonaro is going to go down and be in Brazil again, obviously. You got Mohammed bin Salman in the Middle East. Who knows what's going to happen in Africa, but Russia and China are engaged in providing the defense in Africa. That multipolar world order is emerging quickly, with these regional powers probably taking responsibility for these various regions of the world. Will the United States have full responsibility over Europe? Are Europe going to be American colonies? Guess we'll see. That's not exactly sovereign nationalism provided for the Europeans, but the alternative then would be that the United States could pull out of all of them, and then none of these countries, it seems, could defend themselves in any way whatsoever. I don't even know from a European perspective what's better or worse there. So let's get back to that Reuters article. Trump threatens to lose patience as Europeans float proposals for Ukraine ceasefire. And so there are multiple different proposals. France suggests a 1-month truce to test Russian intentions. Narrative only, and that's fine. Oh, France, they want peace too. The Europeans are worried that Trump has betrayed Ukraine, as if their impressions of Trump's behavior matter in the least. Again, these are ways to manipulate leverage in a situation where the regime has full control of global media and can influence the reputations of individuals, of governments, of corporations, etc. But they've lost that control. The reputation influence doesn't matter at all. It might matter on the streets of Europe. It might matter in American colleges and universities and among people who voted for Kamala Harris. But in a real world sense, it doesn't matter in the least. And most people aren't even going to buy into it in terms of it affecting their perception of Trump's reputation or the reputation of the United States of America. It does not matter at all. Trump said on Truth Social yesterday, we should spend less time worrying about Putin and more time worrying about migrant rape gangs, drug lords, murderers, and people from mental institutions entering our country so that we don't end up like Europe. And that message rings very true and very clear to most American ears at this point. People don't want anything to do with what is going on in Europe. People are focused on what is happening here in America. Trump put out, if it will click open, this Truth Social post today. The only president who gave none of Ukraine's land to Putin's Russia is President Donald J. Trump. Remember that when the weak and ineffective Democrats criticize and the fake news gladly puts out anything they say. And from a devolution perspective, that wouldn't be entirely accurate. Although, again, we are seeing some of these things playing out in an informational past. We observe things in real time that are not actually happening in real time. We are just observing them through a middleman, and the middleman is a delay factor. H.R. McMaster, former Trump national security advisor, was on 60 Minutes last night and had this to say. And you will see on the screen Donald Trump's response on Truth Social in this piece of content. Trump responded upon watching, H.R. McMaster is a weak and totally ineffective loser. Now, is Trump just doing kayfabe? I don't know. But Trump is saying something bad about one of his own appointments, which I'm told makes you a traitor, makes it so that you're threatening unity. You criticize any of Donald Trump's appointments. It's okay now to criticize Pam Bondi, but you're not allowed to criticize Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., even when he's supporting vaccines, and you're not allowed to criticize Dan Bongina ever.
Watches the video from the Oval Office, and what does he see?
Vladimir Putin couldn't be happier, Scott, because what he sees is all of the pressure on Zelensky, all of the pressure on Ukraine, and no pressure on him.
H.R. McMaster knows. He was National Security Advisor in Trump's first term. He's a retired Army general, senior fellow at the conservative Hoover Institution, and a CBS News contributor.
Very conservative.
The allies look at the video from the Oval Office and see what?
What they see is something that's just confounding, a discussion that doesn't reflect the reality of the war in Ukraine, the degree to which this war is a crime against humanity. And they think, how can President Trump be berating the leader of Ukraine while he says kind things about Vladimir Putin?
Doesn't reflect the reality of the war, says H.R. McMaster at the conservative Hoover Institution. Not quite conservative enough to bar you from being a CBS News contributor, of course. Let us move forward. So Senator Chris Murphy was on Morning Mika this morning, and it's important to remember that Mika Brzezinski is the daughter of one of the most famous and powerful globalists of the last century. Now, I want to start this about halfway through, which is difficult to do without. Here we are. So he's going to begin. They're asking about Marco Rubio because, of course, they all voted to approve of Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and aren't getting what they wanted, or so they claim.
Russia hawk even. You have now said that your vote to confirm him as Secretary of State was a mistake.
Yeah, I think he may be the only member of the cabinet that I supported. He was first out of the gate. And, you know, of course, he was a supporter of Ukraine. He was a supporter of NATO. There was a theory of the case that maybe he would, serve as some brake or check on Trump's affection for dictators. You saw him sit there silently. You saw him then criticize Zelensky on the air. Of course, many of us today believe that our vote for him was a mistake. And I guess we should have known that everyone who signs up to work for Donald Trump is signing up for one single project, and that is the transition of American democracy to a kind of kleptocratic oligarchy in which the billionaires rule, in which they get to steal from regular Americans. And if that's the domestic project, then the way that you normalize that kind of government is to associate yourself with similar governments abroad.
All right, so let's pause there. We're going to come back to that. Changing America's role in the world. Same thing we heard from the Financial Times. We are to believe that Donald Trump is responsible for turning America into an oligarchy controlled by billionaires. Because of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and some other tech guys, and that's about it. But most of those tech guys, as we've discussed many times and earlier in this episode, are not on the same page or don't seem to be on the same page. There's no reason to believe that they are on the same page. And their agenda is not the agenda of the American people. So there's that separation already. They might look like, it might seem like they are in some sort of control and the people that are ultimately going to benefit from all of these things. But the truth is, if you have that much money in the first place, unless there is some mechanism to drain that, and there might be, and that actually happens, then they're going to have money no matter how the system changes. Okay. We can go back to a pure pre-constitutional American, federalist. The states are separated. Freedom and liberty have returned. And these people will still have money and power. All right. Like, unless that's going to be extracted somehow, that situation isn't going to change. And so they're going to have more influence than your normal average American. And you can yell and scream about how that's not fair, but it's still going to be real unless we become a communist country. And I can't imagine anybody listening to me wants that. So the power is going to remain the power. Did Donald Trump build these people into this power? Or did that happen over the last few decades, and in truth, much longer, as a direct result of the policies pursued by this same global regime? And of course, that's what it is. So you can't go around blaming that on Donald Trump. Let's go back to Chris Murphy.
The Kremlin. So it's all part of one big domestic project. The foreign policy, the affection for dictatorships abroad, is in effect a means towards transitioning our democracy to something very, very different, something we've never, ever seen before in this country.
Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, at least if our history is to be believed, then I could be totally convinced that it's not. We're going to transition from our democracy into something that this country has never seen before. If he's just pitching controlled opposition to cover for the Uniparty right leading us into the Great Reset, he's doing a very convincing job of it. That man seems genuinely worried, but maybe he's a good actor.
So, Senator, what is the next step? What are you hearing right now? There's been talk this weekend about the possibility.
I should remember how Joe Scarborough talks next time I'm concerned that I stuttered while reading.
Of Keir Starmer and Macron coming up along with Zelensky with a proposed peace deal, and all coming back to the White House. Is that a possibility? What are you hearing?
With Europe and Ukraine, when he's...
Let me see what happened there. Let me see if I can... It sounded like the sound just went out for a second.
With Europe and Ukraine, when he's got a... With Europe and Ukraine, when he's got a patsy in the White House. So I'm glad that Zelensky is talking to the Europeans about a real peace deal.
Does he know what patsy means? Did he want to say a word that sounded kind of similar to patsy that would make Donald Trump sound weak? Is that what he was trying to do? A patsy.
That would actually secure Ukraine. But Russia's not going to negotiate with Keir Starmer or Macron or Zelensky when he knows that he can get essentially everything he wants from the American government.
Again, why would Putin negotiate with Starmer or Macron or Zelensky? They don't have any power. They have no legitimate power to make decisions. That's the first thing. The second thing is, even the people who control them don't have any leverage that they could use to make that deal with Putin. What are they going to do? Pay him more money? He's already like king of the entire Eastern Hemisphere.
So at some point, the United States has to decide whether we're for Ukraine or whether we're for Russia. This minerals deal is overhyped. I think it would be a good table setter for repairing the relationship. But, it's not going to help Ukraine win the war. Maybe over the course of this week, they can find a way to get that deal signed. Maybe the Europeans can continue to push on Trump. But this moment feels pretty hopeless because it feels as if Friday wasn't a surprise. Trump's been telling us for months that he is ready to give away Ukraine. And without U.S. support, Europe can't do this by themselves. So this is a bit of a back to the drawing board moment. Yeah. This feels really, really dire for our friends in Ukraine.
It does. Democratic member of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Trump might give away Ukraine? Ukraine is Trump's to give away? The country is part of Russia. The lands that we've been told the war is being fought over are part of Russia. Trump's not giving it away. He's just saying we're not going to go to war to defend some other nation across the world for no reason, because that's not the kind of country we are trying to be. And if that comes at the cost of the collapse of that global regime, well, that's, I guess, just a cost that we're prepared to accept. And we might actually be cheering it on as it happens. These people are nuts, but they really do seem like they are giving the game away. And again, we observe that Chris Murphy is figuring out how to communicate these things in a way that places the blame for the downside that might be perceived in a real way on Donald Trump, while Donald Trump is messaging to accept and redirect and take credit for all of the good side. We now have the regime telling us about the emergence of the multipolar order, and they are complaining about it. They're saying it's going to be the worst thing ever. Everything is going to end. In fact, let's check out MSNBC's Human Flame, maybe a cold flame. Maybe we can think of a better name for him. The Human Eraser. I don't know what this guy is. Dude's got some crazy hair, and I guess that he's just supposed to seem like more down to earth than all the suit wearing, uptight beltway people. But this is, I guess, the Human Flame.
No, and for that whole period that Trump was referring to, it was this cloak and dagger story of was there something behind the scenes that we didn't know? Was there collusion? All these terms of those years ago. It's now happening in the open. There's no need to investigate anything. It is happening before our eyes. The Kremlinization of the White House. I think so much has happened since January 20th, but I think that Friday meeting hit people who watched it in a way that very few things have, because it felt like to me the kind of end of the free world as a concept and a construct that the United States is involved with.
Right.
Isn't it interesting how
the end of the free world as a concept that the United States is involved with? Kremlinizing, that's what we are doing. No, we are de-regimizing. And again, I would suggest that the Human Flame sounds pretty upset about what's happening. So Volodymyr Zelensky, as he was in Europe over the weekend, had this to say, and this is through a translator.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight, because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying.
They're going to have to send their sons and daughters off to war. They're going to have to fight, and they will be dying. So his job, ostensibly, if he's controlled by elements of the regime, is to convince the United States of America to support his war effort against the Russians over there. We're going to have to fight them over there. We're not going to have to fight them over here ever. But we're going to have to fight them over there, and it's going to be American kids doing the fighting and doing the dying. So it's better, the argument goes, to support Ukraine right now while we still have this chance to win, so that we don't have to do it later once Russia takes over Ukraine and then takes over all of Europe, and then they move all the way to the United States because they're going to take over the United States too. Vladimir Putin is going to take over the entire world, we are supposed to believe. And Donald Trump is going to let him, by the way, because he's Putin's puppet, if you ask Joe and Mika. And it's not about Mika's dad's plan about how to reorder the entire world into the rules-based international world order. It's not about that. They're just trying to protect Ukraine from the Putin menace. He's like the next Hitler, don't you know? Now, Volodymyr Zelensky talking like that kind of sounds like he's making threats. And I mentioned on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night that Zelensky sounded like he was making threats in the Oval Office. And I want to just listen to this clip one more time so I can point this out. I don't think I went deeply into this aspect on Friday's show.
That is trying to prevent the destruction of your country. A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning. Sure. First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem.
So for an extended discussion of that, check out Saturday night. But he says you have this nice ocean. You don't feel it now, but you're going to feel it in the future. And that is in the understanding of Zelensky as an avatar, a proxy for the global regime, whether it's under their control or whether it's under Trump control. And this is all just staged on a different level, even than what most people assume. He's saying that the war is not affecting the United States on the territory of the United States right now, but in the future, if you don't help us, you're going to feel it at home. And I suggest that that is a threat posed in the Oval Office, hence Trump's reaction. And then J.D. Vance pretending like he knew what was going on and reacting the same way as Trump, literally doing the same thing with his hand. So absurd. But he's suggesting that no matter what, the war is going to come here, suggesting that it's in the person of Vladimir Putin. But who knows? The global regime has its ways of taking places over, often through destabilizing societies, acts of terrorism, etc. Are they threatening actual attacks on American soil? It's entirely possible. We shall see. We are coming down to the end here. Just a few more to go, and then we'll get out of here. We are creeping up on 3 hours. Oh, hey, guys, I just changed over to my other window and found out that the Positive commercial is running right now. Has that QR code been up there the whole time? I have no idea. I am totally confused. If you tell me that it has, I am going to be inconsolable, honestly. Is that really up? You guys, if that's been up the entire time, hit a 1 in the chat and let me know. Otherwise, I'll assume that it just went back up when I switched over. But I talked about Positive before. If you have a dog, we've all been there where a dog gets sick and not feeling so good. You don't know what's wrong with it. You're calling the vets in the middle of the night or on the weekend. You can't find a place that'll take you in. That's no good for your fine furried friend. So go to positive.com, use promo code STUDIO. You get 15% off your pet emergency kit. And who knows, that could be the thing that helps save your little dog's life. The pet emergency kit by Positive, positive.com, 15% with the code STUDIO. It's been up there the whole time. Wow. I just gave Positive the best ad ever and made my show a ridiculous ad for Positive. And it's probably been on there like covering my face. Was anybody saying that? It'd be so funny if everybody's been like, it's been up there the whole time. Well, I don't know. Positive better love me. That's all I can say. And my little dog better love me for loving Positive. What a disaster. These are the sorts of things that the machine just does sometimes. Okay. So, the fallout stage of this presentation. This is Russia Today, Russian propaganda media from yesterday. Musk backs U.S. withdrawal from UN and NATO. And that is something that we are meant to believe matters a lot right now. what Elon Musk's opinions about these things are, but he agreed that the U.S. might have to withdraw from the United Nations and from NATO. I think that I would agree with that, and you would agree with that. And virtually anybody who's paying attention to what those bodies are there to do, what their history is, what they have done in the past, what function they serve, how our money is wasted, all of those things, I think that basically anybody would agree, yes, we should withdraw from those organizations. Just like with Europe, without American military, without American money, and without America implementing their policies and projecting their policies as good, there's no point to having those organizations. The United Nations and their agenda would be collapsing. The WHO and the WTO, United Nations linked organizations, well, they're not going to matter anymore. There were none of those ridiculous treaties signed. It's good that we went through those narrative elements, but none of that was ever going to happen. And even if it did happen, people were like, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do that. No. Hey, Normie, you don't have to do anything. Okay? Don't listen to them. It's that simple. You didn't have to wear a mask. You did it to get into certain stores. And I put on a bandana to get into Trader Joe's every now and then. Bandana is almost like the anti-mask, or at least maybe that's just my coping mechanism to say that. You can judge that however you like. But even the people who knew that cloth masks didn't work and wore them anyway, they know there's no chance bandanas work because they don't even cover your mouth. Like your breath just comes right out from under them. At least with the mouth fully covered with those stupid masks, they could pretend that they were trapping all their diseases in. Crazy people. I can't believe that was a real thing. But it was, and people still do it, and they still believe in it. It's mind-blowing. The Associated Press from today. Headline: Ukraine Zelensky says end of war with Russia is very, very far away. It's just going to keep going forever. A deal to end the war between Ukraine and Russia is still very, very far away, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, adding that he believed Ukraine's long-term partnership with the U.S. was strong enough that American support would continue despite recent fraught relations with U.S. President Donald Trump. I think our relationship will continue because it's more than an occasional relationship. I believe that Ukraine has a strong enough partnership with the United States of America to keep aid flowing, he said at a briefing in Ukrainian before leaving London. Well, that is an awfully bold statement because it's absolutely not true. Your country's only existed for like 3 decades, and the entire time, the American government was under the control of the global regime. An agreement to end the war is still very, very far away, and no one has started all these steps yet. The peace that we foresee in the future must be just, honest, and most importantly, sustainable. And so he was also making the argument in one of those appearances that he knows that being part of NATO is impossible, but something like NATO would be necessary. So they're going to have to form a new NATO without the United States, just these European countries. Then they would have to take care of themselves by building up their own militaries and arming and equipping those militaries. How long is that going to take? Years? Decades? And again, maybe that's the justification for why the United States would leave them something. It wouldn't be confiscated. It would be an agreement so that they could defend themselves to some degree. What else could they do? If the United Kingdom, who's kind of like them and France are kind of the, the big global powers, and Germany, I suppose, in Europe, if they can't defend themselves, if they can't even get resources, if their money's collapsing, if the media doesn't work, who's going to support them? The citizens of their countries hate them, their governments. An unbelievable situation. Total weakness. Total vulnerability. It's kind of scary, actually. Scary for them. I mean, I'm just fine with it. Donald J. Trump today on Truth Social pointing out that same Associated Press article. This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It is what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing. And Europe, in the meeting they had with Zelensky, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the U.S. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia. What are they thinking? I guess they're thinking they're in a desperate situation and maybe they need to talk tough for global masters to keep the global regime media pretending the situation is other than it is. Or perhaps all of these officials there in these European meetings who are equally as illegitimate as the comedic actor Volodymyr Zelensky and may themselves just be puppets of whatever's controlling Zelensky. Maybe they're just trying to make Europe look foolish and weak and vulnerable. But how is anyone planning to stand up to Russia? It doesn't seem to be possible in reality, and it is becoming impossible in the narrative. And what has, narratively speaking, the responsibility for creating the situation, and what is going to be the source of strength moving forward? Well, it's going to be Donald Trump, the United States of America, and the America First agenda backed by American ideology. It's not going to be the Great Reset. None of this is getting explained through the Great Reset. And you might argue that none of this is explainable through the Great Reset, because then they would just have to pitch global bureaucracy to the citizens of the world and actually pitch the central bank digital currency to the citizens of the world. There's got to be a different way for them to go about doing that. A lot of that's going to be on economic collapse, the promise to end personal debt. People might be happy to take that. Yes, let's usher everyone into a never-ending financial situation dictated by the central bank digital currency. Maybe they would do that to eliminate their own personal debt while condemning their progeny to an intolerable situation. We shall see. But we can hope that we are not getting dog-walked into that dystopia, and that Donald Trump, through this mode of taking the good elements, shifting narrative credit and actual credit toward America First ideology, and messaging all of the downside of this global reset to global communism and to the regime apparatus and their means of their plans for the one world liberal international rules-based order. Through that, through the public's understanding, through the beliefs formed, and through the behaviors that are undertaken as a result of the adoption of those beliefs, we will actually march forward in liberty and freedom, taking whatever is there and moving it in the other direction, drafting off of that and moving forward into a bright future, and not the one often described by Klaus. This is Axios Today. Trump to hold Ukraine meeting on the next steps, including possible aid freeze. And so this week, this is our new step in the narrative process. We had to get to a point where the public would accept and understand that aid to Ukraine is going to be frozen, and now we're getting it. And even to the commies out there who don't understand anything, to the standard issue villagers broadly, to the child brains out there, they will understand, oh, Europe is stepping up. They're going to take over. So as the United States pulls away, Europe says it's going to step up, even though they can't. And everybody's like, okay, well, at least Europe's got it. And then maybe they start just posting European flags everywhere and try to become Europe within the United States. And it's funny, I was watching, a few of my friends have been watching for the first time a show on Amazon called Man in the High Castle. And they were talking about it. And so I rewatched episode 1 last night to kind of refamiliarize myself with that narrative. And I recall that kind of the whole point is that there's this guy who makes these films that show an entirely different version of the world. So The Man in the High Castle, the original story was Philip Dick's imagination of, a world different than it is, a dystopia, whatever, but one where the Axis powers won World War II, where the Germans, the Nazis, won, and the Japanese won, and the Japanese takes over the west coast of the United States. Germany takes over kind of the eastern half of the United States, and then there are these various neutral zones in the middle of the country. There's also The Man in the High Castle, who has these films that show everybody the United States actually did win the war in Europe. And so it's about whether or not the public's perception is going to be shifted by what they see projected in these movies that actually have a movie projector. These are, film reels at the time. And I thought, man, how interesting is that? What an observation to understand that people will form the reality around themselves based on what they see and believe to be the true state of things. And you could argue that the true state of things is no, actually, the United States did win. And here we have the United States of America. But one thing we discuss often on this show is that perhaps the United States didn't, quote unquote, win. And that the global regime won the war, a war during which they funded both sides. And here we are in the global regime's agenda at its peak form, the United States being the enforcer and the labor supply for all of that. Maybe we did form the wrong beliefs about who won that war and what it all ultimately meant. So this is Axios today. The latest, Trump responded on Truth Social to an AP report that Zelensky had said the end of the war was still very, very far away, writing, "This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky, and America will not put up with it for much longer." Zelensky wrote on X that it is very important that we try to make our diplomacy really substantive. God, I can't talk. Substantive to end this war the soonest possible. We need real peace, and Ukrainians want it most because the war ruins our cities and towns. Even though when Trump said that in the meeting, he was like, no. Our cities are just fine. Yes, life is going on. He went on, "We are still working together with America and our European partners and very much hope on U.S. support on the path of peace. Peace is needed as soon as possible." Mike Waltz told Fox News on Monday that time is not on Zelensky's side. The American people's patience is not unlimited. Their wallets are not unlimited, and our stockpiles and munitions are not unlimited. So the time to talk is now. Trump's national security advisor added that in order to fix the crisis, Zelensky needs to express regret for his public spat with the president in the Oval Office last Friday, say he is ready to sign the minerals deal and that he is ready to engage in peace talks with Russia. Now, a lot of people have mentioned that today. I've seen the comments and seen posts about it go at least a little viral. And there was a segment on Newsmax about how Ukraine had signed a deal with the UK a few days before Trump's inauguration, already making a deal over some of these minerals. And they were suggesting that, Trump's figured this out and that's why the deal is going to fall apart. And maybe in a narrative sense that works for somebody, but let's be realistic. Trump and Russia are negotiating about Ukrainian mineral deals, or Trump's negotiating with Zelensky. Give me a break. And all of that is going to be thwarted because Zelensky signed a deal with the UK 3 days before Trump's inauguration. That's preposterous. As a narrative element, fine. But listening to that and believing that it's actually true and is going to present a real problem to getting this deal done is ridiculous. So we can pass on that. Pass on that completely. Axios then had to update their article down at the end, which is hilarious. Trump told reporters that he hasn't even talked until now about suspending military assistance to Ukraine. He added that Zelensky needs to be more appreciative toward the U.S. in order to solve the current crisis. So we're now going to have a narrative back and forth about whether Trump is thinking about suspending all aid to Ukraine or not. And of course, the answer is yes, and it should have happened a long time ago. And who knows if there's any aid even flowing at this point. Zelensky said he hasn't gotten most of it. A lot of it was us sending old military equipment over there, so they say, that was then sold off onto the black market, or maybe just redeployed to other places. And then the spending was actually to American defense infrastructure to build up the American defense infrastructure here in the United States. Or perhaps it was redeployed to build up data center infrastructure or whatever else in kind of a software idea. If that is to be the future, I don't know the answer to these questions. But it's going to be interesting, very interesting, to see where all this goes. Even the mineral deals themselves. You know, a lot of people, there's at least a theory worth engaging that some of these data centers, the talk about the data centers, the need and the power of AI and what they're actually, what all that infrastructure is going to require. Maybe some of that is overblown. Maybe some of this is just narrative stuff to cover up, to provide a cover story for, I should say, some of the drainage and whatnot. And we shall see. So with that, I think I'm going to get to wrapping up. Snowcat Operator just gifted a number of subscriptions and did earlier as well. So those are getting dished out. I think Dan Wright did earlier. And I think that that's it for rants. Thank you all very much for hanging out in the chat. Oh, here's one more. Valesco16, $5 says, what percent do you guess Trump will be able to get normie MAGA to accept Putin and Russia? Anyone watching this already knows if he can pull that off. Wow. Okay, well, I think that first of all, is a really good question that probably deserves more discussion than I'll be able to give it right now. But I suppose that getting normie MAGA to accept Putin is 100%. And it's, I guess I'd say that it's not necessarily about accepting Putin. I think first and foremost, it's about accepting sovereign nationalism as an idea and really focusing on what America first means as an idea. I think a lot of people who are Trump supporters, even Trump supporters who are more aligned with the Uniparty right and may have just voted for Donald Trump because they found Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Kamala just too offensive and too unserious or whatever to vote for. Getting them to accept sovereign nationalism, I think, would be the first goal, and that's not a hard goal. There are definite globalists who have voted for Trump multiple times at this point and might not accept sovereign nationalism. They accept only American dominance to the extent of America first, and they believe that American dominance requires the American empire as it has been handed down to us by the global regime. So those people are not convinced about America first sovereign nationalism. They're convinced about American imperialism, and those are very different things. So getting them to accept sovereign nationalism is at least possible. And eventually they're just going to have to, or else they're going to look ridiculous, because we are a vast majority and these messages are getting out there. We can look at beliefs that were held by very, very few of us years ago and understand that those beliefs are now majority beliefs. Okay. And that's a bet that I took right at the very beginning in 2020. And it was one of my first genuine acts of faith, I think, that I understood these things are true. If people stand up and are honest about these things and communicate them fearlessly, then other people are going to understand that they're true because they're true and because they're morally right. And then those people will communicate them outwardly, and then more people will believe them. And over time, that will spread, and it will become, all of these beliefs will become majority held beliefs. And at that point, our society will be a different society, because ultimately it is what people believe that forms the society. Okay. So if we can get people to understand that sovereign nationalism is actually the way to go for America, then it's not that great a leap to understand that sovereign nationalism is something that is okay for other countries, and that other countries, for all the same moral and principled reasons, would also be supporting sovereign nationalism. That I don't think is a hard argument to make. And once you accept that, then you really only have to understand that the media that's lied to us about everything else, the regime that has manipulated us and exploited us and oppressed us and enslaved us and censored us, actually didn't tell us the truth about Russia and China and our quote unquote adversaries. At that point, I think the argument is made that Russia is actually not the threat that we were told they were. And what we're going to see over the next few years is an amount of American and Russian partnership, which, by the way, they had during World War II, at least in some sense. And so I think that argument is entirely plausible. I think it is overwhelmingly convincing. And I don't think that we will have any problem making that argument unless we are afraid of making it or unwilling to make it. Okay. And so with that, I'm going to knock out one of these, just another one of these ads, and then we'll get out of here. And we'll see if it actually starts right now or if it starts in 10 minutes from now. And I think it's starting right now, although it doesn't seem like it's going to tell me what to read. But we are, in fact, talking about, there it is, 1775coffee.com. This is Rumble's proprietary brand. You go to 1775coffee.com/studio. Use the promo code studio, get 15% off today. This show, the reach that I get, the lack of censorship I get on Rumble is only possible because of their commitment to free speech and the support for Rumble from viewers like all you guys that allows them to continue down that path when traditional advertisers don't want anything to do with the platform. Most of you are like me and drink coffee every day. That's why you have to try Rumble's 1775 coffee. It's actually some of the best coffee. And it's the same price as the coffee you buy now, but it's way better because they are actually supporting free speech. Also, Rumble 1775 coffee is free from chemicals, rich in flavor. Because their beans are sourced from high altitude farms in Bolivia, handpicked, roasted weekly at their facility in Miami, and delivered fresh to your doorstep. As believers in freedom, buying from Rumble helps fight back against woke corporations like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. So join the coffee revolution, 1775coffee.com. Get a free month supply of their cognitive boosted supplement, Limitless, when you buy 2 bags of their coffee. So give that a shot. The QR code is right over there. And if that allows me to complete that ad, which I hope that it has done, it's impossible to know right now. But with that, I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president. And perhaps this will play, or maybe it won't. Huh, that's very odd.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.